When Faith Happens by J.L. Adams.
About this book. When Faith Happens is a collective creation between my imaginary mind, and some of the real-life obstacles that I've experienced throughout my life. Whether it was personal or examples of other people's trials in life, those occurrences has allowed me to create and shape this crucial piece of literature, that will reassure many people of the importance of only allowing that superior power, which is in charge, to work at its own pace. The title for this divine book, When Faith Happens, was conceived after I was going through some events in life, that many people would consider is impossible to not only survive, but also impossible to even happen in the first place. I wanted to be very exact with what I was going to call this book, since the intended message I wanted to decode to you the listeners, was that life is a journey with a lot of signs, but it's up to us as humans to obey and make full use of those signs. Introduction. Faith, a strong belief in a supernatural power or powers that control human destiny. I spent almost my entire life hearing about this word and knowing the dictionary definition, but never understood what it meant in real life. From going to school, to attending church, ever since I could remember, the word faith was always in my life, side by side with the word God. My angel mother would always encourage me to have faith in God regardless of what I was going through in life. It was those types of principles and more that she had inculcated within my soul from an early age that has followed me throughout my life and is still besides me today. 6 years ago, if you were to ask me what I know about the word faith, I won't have had much to say about it. Now 6 years later, I am fortunate enough to not only know what faith means in real life, but was also very lucky to be saved by this word that has led me to begin and complete this project, When Faith Happens. The word faith saved me from myself on numerous occasions. The most substantial of them all was having faith in myself in order to accept the new challenges that God would place in front of me, while eliminating things that once comforted me, the things I thought I couldn't breathe without. I began facing many challenges in life that came drastically without any warning, and kept coming one after the other without giving me a chance to completely conquer the previous ones I was already dealing with. I was living a real-life nightmare with no chances of waking up from it, and everything was going downhill and was taking me with it. With everything that was happening, the worst of them all was the fact that I was blaming myself for everything. I thought to myself that I should have been able to not only avoid them from happening in the first place, but should have been conscious and know that what I was doing was not just morally wrong but socially unacceptable. Something then spoke to me one day as I was on my last string, while contemplating to give up, and reassured me that God was still in charge, and that He was the controller of my entire existence. The voice that spoke to me also told me that I should place everything into His hands if I wanted the best outcome of whatever I was dealing with. Although that thought was in my head, I still didn't know how to go about doing that, not knowing all along that the gateway between solving the challenges I was facing and God was looking at me in the mirror. I was the solution to my problems, not my friends, not my family, nor could my own dear mother assisted me in preventing those gloomy days that were taking me and my soul to hell. The task was all mine. Firstly, I had to learn how to forgive myself for the selfish things that I once did and to see that there's more to life than just being unorthodox and egocentric, while only caring about my own feelings. Was it an easy task to complete? No, not by a long shot, but I was desperate to become a better person, so I was willing to do whatever it took to change my life for the better. I began looking at every situation in life that I was going through, both personally, and with others involved, from a bystander point of view. So before making any judgment, I would always ask myself one question: what would God do? And amazingly, whenever I would set out to make my judgment, both parties would benefit from my decisions, making me guilt-free and much happier with my inner self. That third-person strategy of mine that I was doing in order to become a better person also brought back a lot of childhood memories of being taught about the importance of having morals and values. I would be very disgusted with myself whenever that would happen, because I was ashamed of what I had become and didn't have any explanation to justify my selfish actions. I guess I was just too overwhelmed by the glitters and bright glow that was happening in my life and thought that they would have been by my side for eternity and never would have vanished. The glitters and bright glow vanished and faith kept me sane, and for that I'm truly grateful. Am I a different person today than I was years ago? Definitely not, but I'm becoming a better person as the days go by, one step at a time, and that's because of that word faith. Faith is still reassuring me every second of every day that God is in charge and He decides when faith happens. Settings. Guyana, the diverse paradise of the Amazon, located on the northern coast of South America and is the only English-speaking country in this continent. Guyana is the home for some 700,000 plus people, who unfortunately only occupy a quarter of the country's land space, leaving the other three-quarter space of land vacant and most of it untouched. Many believe that the living situation today in Guyana is because of their founding fathers' dreams of one day having a Guyana whereby racism and classism were things of the past. Those dreams are becoming reality as the days go by, because of the narrow distance in which the residents lives from each other, so most people have no other choice but to get along with their neighbors. Even after they would have had a misunderstanding, the next best thing to do was to make it right with each other, since they both knew for sure that they would have eventually crossed each other's path sooner or later. A confrontation in the present or in the future was inevitable for these residents, unless one party decided to move to another country. Georgetown is the capital city of Guyana and is basically a melting pot, because it is the center of most of the major business transactions that take place in Guyana on a daily basis. Georgetown is also the home for many people from neighboring countries in and out of the South American region for economic reasons. Because of how small and modernized the capital city is, everything is connected with no barriers or entrance queries to get you from the ghetto part of the city to the part where the rich and wealthy live. Everything is all within a small distance of each other, and is something the residents of the city appreciate for numerous reasons, and never took advantage of. There was many strict systems that were put into place by the government to maintain order and discipline amongst the people of Guyana. Apart from those systems that was put into place to maintain order and discipline in Georgetown, there were also systems that were put into place to allow all of the residents of the city to be associated with each other on a daily basis. Regardless of if you were poor or rich, you could have visited the same nightclubs, public or private hospitals and convenience stores or supermarket all together. There wasn't any type of discrimination towards any class of people in the city. One of the systems that allowed the people of Georgetown to communicate the most with each other on a daily basis was the Georgetown Metro System, GMS. GMS was the company that was responsible for all of the city public transportation services, such as the public buses, the railroad services and any other transportation service that was used and utilized by the residents of Georgetown. All of the transportation services were very important in their own unique ways, but the public buses are the most important means of transportation in the city. The bus was efficient in getting you around the city faster and safer because it had its own driving lanes and pedestrians bus stops, which could only be used by the city buses. Unlike the other public transportation services, these buses worked round the clock, Sunday to Sunday, and were only 15 minutes apart from each other, so it was used and appreciated very much by the residents of the city. There were 4 different zones in Georgetown in which the bus would operate through daily, and these zones were made up of 5 or 6 different communities. Some of them even more depends on the ward of the city that they belong to. Because of how close the communities were situated, the route that the buses had to drive in the zones would go through the rich neighborhood all the way to the neighborhood that was considered as the ghetto. Because of this, and how diverse the city was, each day was a new experience for the people of the city, and more so the passengers that would use public transportation. On Saturday the 19th of August in the summer of 2000 was more than a new experience for some of the residents of Georgetown. That morning was more of a new beginning to those passengers, as many of them would say when describing the events that took place on that day. It was a new beginning of patience, faith, gratitude, and appreciation for life, which still replays over and over within their minds. Part 1. Mandi. Dear God, I come to you today not just as your child or a humble servant, but mostly a disciple, someone who follows and believes in your works. As I kneel here today, I know it's wrong to question your actions, and your timing in performing miracles, but all I'm asking is, why us, Lord, why us? We've done everything that you've requested for us to do in order to make it to heaven, to have eternal life. Why are we suffering? What have my family done to deserve this type of punishment, O God? Are we not your children anymore? Are you not merciful and gracious anymore? Please show me a sign that you still care. My husband has no reason to be in so much pain. We have kids. He has 2 beautiful daughters to live for and to pass on your teachings to. Help him, O Lord. Give him the strength and courage to pull through this. I need him. His daughters need him. Our family and friends need him. The Holy Book did taught us that prayers move mountains, that prayers change things. I've been praying for months and things are only getting worse. How much more should I pray? How much more should my family pray? How much more should our friends at the church pray? Aren't we praying enough? We've dedicated our entire life not just to worship you but also to learn and practice your teaching, and this is our reward. This is the thanks we get. Pain, pain, and more pain. Save him, save him, save him, I beg of you, O God. Please save him. We cannot handle this type of grief at the moment. I cannot lose my best friend. We still have a lot of living to do, O Lord. Death cannot be your reward to us, for being so dedicated to you. Please save him. I said with tears in my eyes, as I looked at my dying husband sound asleep on our bed while on my knees, that Saturday morning. My name is Mandi Fairbairn. I am a 48-year-old mother of 2 beautiful twin girls, Anna and Anne. When I gave birth to them 15 years ago, it was the best thing that had ever happened to me in life. What a joyful moment. I remember it as if it was yesterday. I was a new mother and a new person with lots of expectations and hope for my newborn twins and my family. I watched them grow so beautiful and so quickly, and at just 15 years old I had already seen myself in both of them. It was as if I was looking at my own reflection in a mirror whenever I was looking at them. I think some may call that the mirror effect if I'm not wrong. I didn't just see my face in their faces, the way they spoke, their demeanor, their value for family and friendship and everything else about them made me reflect on my life as a teenager many days. To see them grow so humble while adapting the same values and morals that my parents taught me, was a blessing from God. I loved them dearly. They're my priceless jewels, as I would tell my friends, and I love and appreciate them so much, and it wasn't just because of the fact that they were my kids or because we were best friends. I love my daughters mostly because we shared similar interest. We loved each other unconditionally and wanted the same things in life, and one of the things that we all prayed for daily was to remain a strong and healthy family, while living together and loving each other. That dream we all shared and was working hard to accomplish daily, had been threatened by their father's illness and was a very devastating time for us all. Barry Fairbairn and I have been married for 28 years, but had been inseparable ever since the day after my 16th birthday, when he promised me that he would marry me if I would be his girlfriend. We dated for a couple of years, and just as he promised, on my 20th birthday he popped the big question and we got married weeks after. Apart from other plans, our main goal as newlyweds was to have a beautiful family and also a beautiful place where we could raise our kids and call home, in which we did. After years of working and building together, it wasn't an easy task, but we did it as a team, hand in hand, side by side. We didn't just accomplish our goals that we had made together, but most importantly we managed to keep that unbreakable bond as husband and wife that we had promised God to keep on our wedding day. Barry was a contractor for a local welding company in which he worked for almost 18 years and was laid off 6 months ago. After his job found out that he had been diagnosed with a severe case of brain cancer, they were afraid that the company would have had to stand the expense for his medical bills, so they fired him. Barry was a man of God, so he was never mad at his so-called friends that fired him. Instead, he kept praying for them and kept believing that he was going to get better, and get back his job, because of how much he loved what he did. His sickness was kind of strange because none of his family members had ever had cancer, and his doctors couldn't find a trace from where it came from. They did suspect the type of work he did was the cause of his sickness. The cancer was destroying his body rapidly, causing him to lose tremendous amounts of weight due to loss of appetite. Barry still believed and would always try to convince us that he was going to get better, in order to be the sweet and dedicated husband and father he has always been. To see him in so much pain would always break my heart, and most of all our girls were in fear to see their father suffering, as if they knew for a fact that he was going to die. I was a bus driver who had been working with the city for over 20 years and an active member of a local church in my community, that my family would attend 3 to 4 times a week. Out of everything that life had offered me, whether it was my kids, my husband, my job, or a nice home, my most prized possession was the gift to serve my Lord God, and I did that joyfully. The fervent feeling I got from talking to my God on a daily basis, was always a priceless feeling in which I enjoyed every bit of and still do to this day. That feeling had also motivated me to begin encouraging other family members and friends and even strangers to become believers of His works. I was encouraging people through community outreach activities throughout my neighborhood, and also handed out invitational flyers for them to visit our church. What I was going through at that particular time was devastating and depressing, because ever since my husband was laid off, the burden of the bills was on me and I was not making ends meet. Failing to pay our bills on time caused our home to end up in foreclosure. We were going to lose the home that we lived in for over 20 years, and raised our kids in also. After saying my daily morning prayer, which was a little different that morning because instead of me thanking God for life and the health and strength that He had woke me up with, I basically was questioning His actions. I stood up and began preparing for another day at work. It was 7 o'clock that Saturday morning in the summer of 2000, and my kids and husband were still asleep. Like any good mother and wife would do, I made breakfast and placed it on the dining table, then went to kiss my daughters followed by my husband before heading out to work. I lived about 30 minutes from my job, so every morning while I drove to work I would listen to the gospel radio station, and that morning wasn't any different as I entered my car and drove off. The pastor on the radio was talking about perseverance, and how you should never stop being persistent in achieving your dreams and hopes, because life is about challenges. I didn't listen to another word but immediately switched the radio off and continued my ride to work calmly with no music. I thought of my husband's situation and our home that we were going to lose if we didn't come up with the mortgage for that month and also what we had owed for the previous months that we've missed. Coming up with that kind of money was impossible since my salary was barely enough for food and utility bills, and the bank had already denied my 4th request for a personal loan. I continued to drive and was basically still questioning God as I was doing earlier while praying at home. I still was not getting any answers or feeling any better about the situation, so I decided to try and blank everything out of my mind, which didn't happen. I drove into my job compound, parked my car, and went on to clock in, before picking up my bus keys to start my daily trips. While doing that, I bumped into a few of my coworkers who worked the same shifts as I did, and we would always stop and say hello to each other and just a quick "how you doing?" as we continued to get ready to hit the road. I was scheduled to leave the compound at 9:45 that morning, and it was only 9:30 when I checked the time. I then decided to go to the restroom to make sure that I was looking presentable and not as if I had a dying husband at home and other problems in life. As I was exiting the bathroom to head to the bus to begin my daily trips, the radio came on in the building and it was the same pastor again that I was listening to while driving to work. He was still talking about perseverance, in which I completely ignored, and walked quickly out of the building to the bus lot and got into my bus, and drove out of the compound. The route I would normally drive was Zone 25, which was considered as the urban part of the city where I lived. I would occasionally get scheduled to do other zones if a driver was absent or if I needed to pick up an extra shift at times. Zone 25 was made up of about 100 streets and was connected to 8 major intersections, which caused the roads to be busy all day around, with both vehicles and pedestrians, so my daily trips was always lively. Whether it was school kids going to school in the morning or workers going to lunch at lunchtime, my bus was always crowded. But that morning I was scheduled to do a different zone, I had to run Zone 21. Zone 21 was basically a small part of Georgetown that was consisted of Campbellville, Kitty, Kingston, East, and West Ruimveldt, and a little part of Albo Easttown was also included. I had done Zone 21 a few times before, so I was very familiar with that route, and had no problem doing it again. Zone 21 was also the zone my kids went to school in, along with the church my family and I attended, so I basically knew a lot of people from those communities. It would take me 10 minutes to get to the first stop to begin making pickups after I left the bus compound. I arrived at the first stop at 9:48 a.m. and got my first passenger. Joyce. I am beautiful, smart, kind, humble, and very independent. I'm also a daughter, a sister, an aunt, a friend who's loving and caring, and most of all a strong believer of faith. Those are a few words that would be used to describe me, if you are to ask about my character. At 23 years old I had a master's degree in journalism and a promising, adequately compensated career. I was an anchor for one of the most watched newscasts in Guyana. You would think that with all I had going for me, I would never settle for less, or accept anyone or anything that would tarnish my reputation or make a mockery of who I was in public view. I have been settling for way less than I deserve for the past year. I did not know if it was because I was in love or because I had lots of faith in what Dwayne and I had. I thought that one day I might just have him for myself. Dwayne Carter Wilson was a known womanizer, and my friends would often remind me. Friends can be very influential in relationships. But when it comes to my Dwayne, the advice my friends offered was like a dog barking at a flying bird, completely useless. I met Dwayne on a social media platform. He consistently inboxed me asking me for my telephone number. He always stressed a burning desire to get to know me and be my friend, nothing more. He made it clear to me that he was already in a relationship, but it won't hurt to have new friends. I would respond to his messages now and then, and we'd engage in small talk. Those conversations ultimately resulted in us exchanging numbers, which led to us meeting for a friendly drink one night, and we grew closer after that first meeting. We had lots of fun together. I had been single for 13 months before meeting him and decided that I wasn't going to rush back into any serious relationship since the last one was a waste of my time. 2.5 years of lies and tears. I thank God that I mustered enough courage to move on. It was a memorable experience, and for that I am grateful, but I was not going to put myself through that again. But Dwayne found my lonely heart and stole it, as I would joke to my friends. I knew that he was in a relationship but could not restrain myself. He was charming, smart, and well-spoken, but what I admired most was that he was brutally honest. Dwayne's honesty was new to me, since every guy that tried to get to know me would lie to get their way with me, and once I found out, which I always did, that turned me off. But Dwayne was different. His boldness came as a shocker and a turn-on at the same time. Dwayne made it clear to me that he was in a rocky marriage. It has been ongoing for 7 years. He and his lifey, as he would say whenever he would describe her to me, had been going through a lot of ups and downs, for a few months since she had a miscarriage with their twins. He told me because of how much he loved and cared for her, he was willing to do whatever it takes to fulfill the promises that he had made to her and God on their wedding day. As time went by, we kept in contact and would be in each other's company whenever I was free or whenever him and his wife fell out. I did not flag the arrangement because I genuinely felt for him. I liked the person he was. The more time we spent, the stronger my feelings grew. I began to adore that man. I thought that he was feeling the same way about me because whenever he spoke to me I would hear it in his voice, or so I thought, and would also feel some bit of chemistry when he touched me. Bizarrely, the way he made love to me was always relaxing and ecstatic. I was sinning with pride, and the bridge that I promised myself I would have never crossed was now behind me. I'd cracked the 10 Commandments and did it with pride and joy. It felt amazing and made me forget what it feels like to acknowledge my sins. I was blinded by a love that belonged to someone else. He had what I needed, I felt that the peace of mind that Dwayne provided was worth committing any sin. I was falling in love, head first. I was losing ground the deeper I went, and I hated him for it. I hated it when he left me to go back to his other life. The life where I didn't exist, and the person that was now getting his time was the woman that carried his last name. But I was a realistic person who knew exactly what I was getting into. I agreed to this voluntarily, so I would always control my anger and be patient with him. We were secret lovers and best friends for 12 months, and I was feeling more for him than I did on day one. He was a ray of sunshine, and every moment that we spent together was full of fun and excitement. Dwayne helped me to escape reality while catering to my sexual needs, and I did whatever I could have done to return the favor. I was his comforter whenever he and his wife were having issues. Never have I ever advised him to quit on his marriage or try to get between him and her. I knew for a fact that he cared and loved her very much and was only doing what he felt was best to save his marriage. The way he would talk about her, the terms he would use to describe her would make me envy her at times, although I didn't know her personally. But we spoke about her so much that I felt as if I knew her personally. I was happy to know that a man thinks so highly of another female, even if it wasn't me. It felt like a blessing to be in his space. Dwayne had me living a split life. Part of me wanted to leave him and the other wanted to stay with him. It was no easy decision to make. We continued seeing each other, and my feeling kept growing for him. I craved his indulgence more and more. I'd do anything for his love and affection. They were days I couldn't wait to hear his voice and wouldn't unless he called me. I never wanted to call him whenever he was with her, so I always waited to be contacted. I respected the arrangement. I was playing the role I signed up for with pleasure. I played by the rules. I wasn't going to be the hypocrite. My friends felt I was ridiculous and advised me to leave him alone and find someone to call my own, someone whose love would have belonged to me and only me. I couldn't let go, and they had not the slightest idea of what I was feeling for Dwayne, the way he made me feel, or even what made me let him into my heart in the first place. It was my course to charter, and I was having it my way. It was a dalliance I refused to accept for what it was. I held on to the belief that we were something more. One day it would no longer be our Dwayne. He would only be my Dwayne. I found myself silently wishing for him and his wife to call it quits. They weren't happy with each other anymore. All they did was argue. Why stay? He loved me. We loved each other, we belonged together, but his marriage was the only thing that was stopping us from being together. Just as I had hoped, it ended. It was my answered prayers. Dwayne and his wife split and were going through with a divorce. When I got the news, I felt as if my destiny was being rewritten. I felt as if the end of his marriage would mean the beginning of a new life for us. Heaven must have had a laugh. I was wishing in vain. Instead of making me his number one priority, 4 months after, I had to listen to how much he missed her and wanted to work out their differences. Which would have never happened because she had already found someone else and was living her best life. When it got back to Dwayne, it really hurt him. He became miserable, depressed and lonely, and I was always there to comfort him even when he didn't want me to. I was blinded by the reality of him being mine, so I would always try to do more than was requested in my attempts to comfort him. My dedicated stubbornness made him mad at me numerous times, but I believed in him and wasn't going to turn my back on him like his lifey. Our pillow talk was about her. After sex, instead of expressing his feelings towards me, he would just speak of how much he missed her and how unbelievable it was that she gave up on them. I would lay there and listen to him ashamed, with raging anger subdued. But I was not prepared to have my lover upset. I would stay silent for fear of changing his mood. All I wanted was for things to remain the way it was between us, even if he didn't feel the same way for me as he did for her. I had incredible faith in Dwayne. Sometimes I would just sit and think about our situation and just laugh at myself, a laugh out of anger, but I would always go running when he called. After months of comforting him and solidifying the bonds of our friendship, we had a full-on relationship. He got over her, the divorce was final. It felt as if I were on the winning side, I finally became his #1 priority, his love and his better half as he would advertise. I was complete, a good paying job, a healthy family, supportive friends, and a man that loved me and I adored him. Dwayne made daily attempts to make me feel extra special, whether it was randomly sending roses to me at my job or an early morning text message wishing me a blessed and productive day. He did his bit. He knew what to do to always put a smile on my face. Sometimes he would even send me a simple one-paragraph letter written and signed by him reaffirming how much he appreciates me and what we have, and how grateful he was to me for never giving up on him. Months passed and we were growing as one, stronger and stronger every day. Our relationship was a beautiful one. My friends started liking him and would often sing our praises. We were the couple to envy. We were in love, the sex was great, our growth was evident, and the best part about our relationship was the fact that we were best friends, so we talked about everything, nothing was off limits. He was always honest with me and I same. Everything was perfect, at least that is how it appeared until that Saturday morning. Dwayne looked at me and said that there is something important that he needs us to talk about. At first, I thought it was one of his affectionate speeches of how much he loves being inside of me. He would remind me of that after we would finish making love. I looked at him with an elated expression before he began to speak. Dwayne was never the type of person to try and sugarcoat anything wrong that he had done. He was blunt and would usually get straight to the point. He looked at me and said that he and his ex-wife have been seeing each other for a few weeks now, and she is pregnant by him and will be going through with the pregnancy. I was no longer feeling giddy as I was 2 minutes prior. It was a low blow and I did not deserve this. I didn't say a word to him. I got up, left his apartment while feeling betrayed, disgraced and used. I felt worthless and I felt like dying. As I was walking to the bus stop, the only thing that was on my mind was the fact that I can't deal with this type of pain. I knew that I didn't deserve this type of payback, especially from the person whom I gave my all to. I felt as if death would have been the only solution for the pain I was feeling. I honestly wanted to die. I wished that the earth would open and suck me in. What was I going to tell my friends and family when they found out about this? I got to the bus stop, still in tears, while trying to wipe it off before getting onto the bus. Tears gushed from my eyes as if a tap was turned on. It was impossible to dry my eyes before the bus arrived. Teddy. Addicted I wasn't, it was more of me just trying to do what I had to do to stay alive, and satisfying my cravings kept me alive and well. I felt as if I could have gone days without oxygen once I had a single drop of it in my system. I was in love before and it was a beautiful feeling. I was anxious to start a new job before, whereby I would stay up all night and wouldn't sleep because of how excited I was. I felt what it felt like to be a new father and to see your newborn child not once or twice but 3 times before, but the feelings that alcohol gave to me was all of those feelings combined. I felt an electric wave flowing through my body, whenever I would quench my thirst by drinking alcohol. It was an humbling feeling that my body couldn't live without and I was never going to deprive myself from that feeling. At age 55 with 3 beautiful kids and a newborn granddaughter, you would have thought that I would have already got rid of my drinking habit years ago, but I didn't. I wasn't getting the courage to do so. I kept telling myself one last drink, and I've been telling myself one last drink for the past 10 years. Alcohol has made me lose everything that was important to me, from my job, to my home, to my family, and most importantly my dear wife, who died 10 years ago from a liver disease. Marty was never a heavy drinker. She drank once or twice a year, and believe it or not, that was enough to give her a liver infection, which was her cause of death just weeks after she was diagnosed. It was an unbelievable event that really shook up our family, because I would drink twice or even 3 times a week and my liver was in tip-top condition. My therapist and other family members had tried to persuade me into believing that Marty's death was an act of God, and that she was in a better place, but I knew better. What kind of God would take a new mother's life and leave her newborn motherless, at the time when a baby would most need their mother? Not my God, not the God of Jerusalem that we both served. Her death puzzled not only my existence but also everything I believed in, and ever since her death, I had a new best friend that would comfort my lonely nights and sorrowful days. I couldn't live without a bottle by my side. Even the thought of me being sober would make me feel so sick that I would throw up at times. It was mandatory that I drink at least 1 liter of liquor every day, whether it was vodka, rum, beer, or anything else that contained alcohol. I had to get it in my system. I don't know if I was trying to escape reality by drinking so much or I was just trying to drink myself to death. Whatever it was, I didn't care too much at all. The only thing I cared about was how I was going to get my next drink. I didn't have any job, so the money that I would use to buy liquor with would come from me begging in the streets. Sometimes even some old friends of mine would recognize me and become sympathetic since I would ask them for something to eat, and if that didn't happen there were always the stealing episode. I would steal and get caught occasionally, but since I was a homeless drunkard, store owners would just kick me out of their stores and banned me from coming back instead of calling the cops. Being kicked out and banned was what I could have dealt with but would have to change spots, so sometimes I would find myself cross-country trying to steal liquor, but I honestly didn't care how I got it. I was living on the streets and would spend my May-June nights in different shelters since that was known as the rainy season in Guyana, but the weather was great, so I basically slept wherever night caught me. I slept in the park on the park bench, in store bathrooms, in parking lots, or even in the cemetery. My kids didn't kick me out of my home. I actually ran away because I couldn't stand seeing myself like this in front of them or any other of my family. I didn't want them to label me a drunkard or someone that they were ashamed of, so I left them a note saying that I went to visit a family member for a couple of months in Region 4. That lie is the reason I've been living on the streets for over 8 years. After I left my home and kids, I decided that it would have been best to move to another region, and that's how I ended up here in Demerara Mahika, which is the official name of Region 4. I began living on the streets of Georgetown in a small community called Tiger Bay. Tiger Bay was located not too far from the heart of the city, so it was very convenient for homeless people like myself to live freely, and to beg for daily living assistance. Tiger Bay had numerous empty lots, abandoned buildings, and heavy traffic at times, since a major intersection was located at the head of it. I was living in paradise, literally, and the people that were residing in Tiger Bay basically mind their own business and would never interfere with us, since we were never any threat to them or their kids. I was originally from Mandi, which was the capital of Region 8, Potaro Siparuni, and had been living there my entire life without ever stepping out of the region, so Mandi was everything to me. Mandi and Georgetown had many similarities and a lot of differences, but the differences of the two cities stood out more than their similarities. Georgetown was more developed and the people of Georgetown were more civilized than the people of Mandi, but when it comes to values and morals, the two cities had the same interest. Mandi life was all I knew of, and moving to Georgetown was a new experience for me, but I was always someone who loved to explore whenever I was given the chance to. I wasn't afraid to test the city waters without knowing where I would have ended up, and the first place I ended up after arriving there was at a rum shop, as the locals in town would call the city bars. This wasn't because I was an alcoholic, it was more to celebrate my arrival, but unfortunately I was at that particular rum shop for my first week in Georgetown. I stayed and drank from morning all the way to the next morning, drinking and begging for 7 days straight, until the shop owner kicked me out. I was living the life of a homeless drunkard for years in Georgetown, corner to corner without any shame. Although that wasn't the person I truly was, I felt as if that was my true purpose in life. I felt as if that was the right path for me because at that time only alcohol was giving me that peace of mind that I was used to having when Marty was alive. I was like a dependable baby and alcohol was my mother's touch, and I wasn't seeing any sign of hope or even a chance to get back to the place I was 10 years ago. I was living a carefree life with no plans for tomorrow or no expectations for tomorrow, and was at a point of no return because of my drinking habit. Alcohol had consumed my entire existence, at least that was how I felt like at the time, but that Saturday morning changed my life. I don't know if it was for the good or the bad, but my life was changed. It is something that replays within my head daily, and although I wasn't sober that morning I felt everyone else's pain. "Sir, hello, sir, get up," was what I heard before turning over and noticing that it was 2 police officers who were standing over me, trying to wake me up since I was sleeping on the bus stop bench that Saturday morning. I got up and said, "What's the problem, officers? I'm only here sitting waiting for the bus, please don't bother me." They both looked at me and smiled as one pointed to the opposite direction and said, "Okay, look, there's a bus coming, get on it and get off this bench," before they both walked off while chuckling to themselves. I figure they had recognized who I was since this wasn't the first time I'd seen them or had an encounter with them. They both were local patrol cops within the community, so we would bump heads regularly. I didn't remember at all how I got to that bus stop, or anything that happened yesterday or even last night. All I was certain about was the way my stomach was aching. I knew for a fact I wasn't hungover, so I figure it was something that I had eaten from the day before. Not knowing what it was that I had eaten, I continued to sit on the bench and began to reflect on the way I was living my life. I looked around and noticed my reflection on the glass of the bus stop and felt ashamed of what I was seeing before my eyes. How did I allow myself to get like this? So worthless? Looking so hideous? Dear God, is this my path of righteousness? I said to myself before looking down at my left hand and noticing my wedding ring. I swore to Marty's dead body that I would never take it off, and had kept that promise up to date. As I began thinking about Marty, a small voice within my head said to me that I don't deserve to be alive. I must have been daydreaming, I thought to myself, or it was probably the alcohol that was talking to me, but whatever it was that spoke to me, it was very convincing. I immediately began to see all the wrong things that I've done throughout my entire life, from abandoning my kids, to feeling guilty for Marty's death, to stealing so that I could drink alcohol. My body was a guilt zone, and it was then when the same small voice that had spoken to me earlier spoke to me again, but this time the voice was advising me to take my own life. The voice began showing me more reasons why I should go ahead and commit suicide, including the fact that I would have reunited with Marty, and I wanted nothing more than to reunite with Marty. I felt as if that was my destiny, so I decided that I was going to take my own life that day, but I wanted to see my kids one last time. I sat at that bus stop for at least 4 hours, lost and just gazing around, seeing several people passing by. Many bus stopped and picked up passengers, and they would all give me that look as if I grossed them out, in which I probably did due to how hideous I was looking. I then came to a conclusion of what I was going to do. I was going to travel back to Region 8 to see my family, but from a distance, before committing suicide. Another bus stopped and I got on it, without even having a penny to pay for the ride, but the bus driver didn't say anything to me as I just walked right past her and took a seat. Nettie. That Saturday I had left my son's father's house after taking my newborn son to see him for the first time since I gave birth, 10 days ago. I am a single mother who believes that there's an explanation for everything. Whether or not it was avoidable, I am convinced that everything that happens to us is a part of God's plan, and was predestined since we were born. Be it good or bad, I believe that God is responsible for it. So me dropping out of college as a result of unplanned pregnancy, me putting my education and my future at risk, was God's plan. It was inevitable. I have never questioned God's doing, and was not going to start now. Instead, I always prayed and hoped for the best outcome of any negative thing that happened in my life. I believe that unless it's death, we all can transition any negativity into something positive by the grace of God. That was my beliefs and will always be. At 23 years old, I was still living with my parents. It wasn't by choice but because of family values and morals. My parents grew up in extended families, so they would always try to keep our family together and close-knitted. They both were always extremely supportive of anything that me or my siblings wanted to do. Whether it was to drop out of college or to get visible tattoos, there would be a long lecture, but at the end they would allow us to make decisions for ourselves. I had an older sister and 2 younger brothers that I lived with. In the same way my older sister was my role model, I was my younger brother's role model, so I did my utmost to set a good example. Although my mother was our best friend, my dad was more supportive than she was. Don't get me wrong, she supported whatever me and my siblings did, but if it wasn't school related, our grades had to be high for her to give us her 100% support. My dad, on the other hand, would just advise us to make sure that we were happy in whatever we decided to do. It was no different when I found out I was pregnant while still in college. I told my parents the exciting news together. As expected, they both were very, very happy, but my mom raised the issue of me dropping out of school because of my pregnancy. My dad was overjoyed. He started making plans for the baby. He was excited to be a grandfather. He was often singing that tune to my older sister. I decided to tell my parents the wonderful news before telling Todd. I figured once they were happy for me, I won't be fazed by the opinions of others, not even Todd. Todd was my high school sweetheart before he migrated to Toronto with his family some years back. For some reason or the other, we never kept in contact with each other. Out of sight was really out of mind. I never really thought about him while he was away. This was strange because we were inseparable in high school. We hadn't heard from each other for almost a decade until he remigrated to Georgetown. After bumping into each other, I must admit the sparks were still there. It was as if he never left and we were together all along. Luckily, he was single at the time and so was I. We exchanged numbers and began to communicate again just like old times. After a few days of talking and hanging out, we realized that we still cared about each other, so we decided to give us a try once more. We were a fun couple. He was cool, kind, smart, and more importantly, my parents and family liked him a lot, so from time to time he would be over at our house just hanging and having fun. He was the opposite to everything that I was. We got along very well, of course with a lot of compromising and tolerance. 2 years came and went by so fast and we were still having fun in our relationship. We basically did everything together, and the sex was amazing. I love kids dearly and would always dream of that day when I would become a mother, but I was in school at that time and kids wasn't on my priority list, neither was it on Todd's. Todd didn't want kids, but never provided a proper explanation for this decision. I figured he was afraid because his mom raised him alone. His dad left them when he was 6 years old and never came back. I interpreted his story as a reason for him not wanting kids, but although he didn't want to become a father, he wasn't using any precautions to prevent unwanted pregnancy, even when I would urge him to. Todd would just laugh it off whenever I would ask him to use protection and joke about him not being able to make kids, which unfortunately was wrong. I found out that I was 9 weeks pregnant after I began feeling very upset for days, especially at morning time, so I decided to visit my doctor for a checkup. I was so excited when I got the news and couldn't wait to tell Todd. I had hoped that he would have changed his mind about not wanting any kids, especially since I was already pregnant. I was totally wrong. Instead of him being happy for us, the first question he asked me was if I was sure. I told him that I was 100% sure. He then asked me if I was keeping the baby, and once I said yes, his entire attitude changed. He transformed into some kind of aggressive monster. I couldn't believe my Todd was reacting this way. He stood up and looked me in the eye and asked me to have an abortion. It was unnerving. Me having an abortion would have never happened regardless of what he said or did to me that day. I was raised right, and in my world, abortion was murder. Added to my principles on abortions, that was my first child. Nothing or no one could have influenced me enough to abort him. I was so disappointed in Todd for acting as if it didn't take two for conception. Why have unprotected sex if you are not ready to be a parent? Why would you allow yourself to ejaculate into a woman, when you're fully aware of the possibilities of impregnating her? Why suggest that I murder my child? I stood there listening to him not only whining about how he's not ready to become a father, but unsettlingly trying to blame me. Todd complained for a while. He continued scrutinizing and chastising me, and this made my blood boil. I decided to leave and head home. I told my parents what had happened. My dad explained to me that he was afraid and he will get over it eventually. He said that everything's going to be fine. I anticipated the day Todd would come to his senses. However, there was no sign of Todd throughout my entire pregnancy. I didn't hear from him, neither did I see him, but thank God I had my family to support me, and they certainly did. My family was always there, foot to foot, comforting and cheering me up, while trying to make sure that I had a healthy baby. I am so grateful for them. Although my family had me smiling every day, my grin was shallow. Within the depths of my being, I was angry and lonely because I missed Todd, my Todd. On the 27th of November in the year 2000, I gave birth to a beautiful and healthy baby, weighing 5.5 pounds, with brown eyes and a bright smile, as if he had been in this world before. He was the splitting image of his dad, so I decided to call him Todd, after his father. When my son was a week old, my parents suggested that I take him to Todd's house so that he can see his son and his mother can see her new grandson. I was totally against taking him to see them, but I obliged because it was my parents who suggested it. I decided that I was going to take my son to see his father the following Saturday when he was 9 days old. That morning before I left my house, I was still having doubts about taking my son to visit his dad because I didn't know what to expect once I got there. I wasn't going to let him chastise me as he did the last time we saw each other. I was really skeptical about going, but my parents persuaded me that it was the proper thing to do even if he still felt the same way as he did before. It took 10 minutes to get to Todd's house by bus, but I decided to walk since I figured the baby needed the fresh air. It took us about 30 minutes to get over to his house. I wasn't one to be queasy, but upon my arrival I was perturbed, and wanted to leave. I pushed past those feelings. I rang his doorbell, and stood at his door patiently and anxiously while asking God for the best outcome. A woman came to the window to see who it was. I had never seen that person before. She left. Then Todd came to the window, and the look upon his face when he saw it was me, was ferocious. That made me so scared. He came outside, and the force in which he closed his door with could have almost torn it off. He didn't even give me a chance to say 2 words and was reluctant to greet his newborn son. Instead, he was antagonistic. He told me to leave him alone and to get off his porch. I blanked out. It wasn't that I was in shock, but I was furious. I wanted to physically hurt him because of the things he said, and his hesitancy to acknowledge his son. I walked off his porch feeling elated, so helpless, so disappointed in myself for not evading that situation. I had so many crazy selfish thoughts going through my mind and didn't know what I was going to do from there on. I really didn't have the strength to walk back home, so I decided to wait for the bus, and as I stood at the bus stop, I began crying, while looking at my newborn in his innocent eyes. I thought of how selfish his father was for not wanting him, as if he did something wrong to him. Was it possible for someone to be so heartless and so uncharitable towards his own child? I seriously didn't want to deal with this kind of drama and emotions, I said to myself as I waited for the bus while gazing at my son. Josh. In the beginning there was a Word, and the Word was God, and God is the Word. He created the heavens, the earth, and everyone on earth in his own image and likeness, so therefore I am God. But if I was really God, would the world accept me as I am, like they've accepted God, as their Lord and personal Savior? I don't think they would, at least not where I'm from. We are cultured differently. I've also learned that I'm the decider of my destiny, and on Judgment Day I can only give accountability for my life, so I will live a life of my own, the life that God has blessed me with. East Rumvelt was a family-oriented community. There you would find 3 and sometimes 4 generations of family living together in the same yard space. Although there may be disagreements between members of these families, at the end of the day they would always put family first, and that's what kept them together. Their values and love for the word family certainly helped with solving unnecessary family drama. Fun and very interesting, that's the 2 words I would always use to describe East Rumvelt as, and that was for many reasons but mostly because of the many different types of people that lived in my community. There were people from all walks of life with many different beliefs, so every day was a different learning experience for my friends and me. Whether it was in school, at home, or just going to the marketplace, you would hear or see something that you weren't used to within your household. Although East Ruimveldt consisted of many different people and religions, one similarity that those religions had in common was finding the opposite sex attractive. None of them believed in same-sex relationships. It was forbidden to entertain the thought of finding the same sex attractive. Having sexual fantasies about the same sex and allowing others to find out was a disgrace to your entire family. For this reason, most homosexuals would keep that thought to themselves. They remained closeted and would act out in what they deemed a safe space. I've seen and heard parents chastise and even abused their children, because of such thoughts and actions as if they were the controller of our destiny. Some of these were parents that were solid within their religions and believed so much in their God, and what he had made within this world, but still believed that it was the devil that created people like myself. I was taught ever since I was 5 years old that a man's job was to fall in love with a woman, and a woman's job was to fall in love with a man and not the same sex. Then get married, have kids, and live happily ever after together as husband and wife. These were the teachings from the Bible that my father, who was the pastor for the church in our community, would teach me at church and at home as a child. I'm 19 now and he still tells me that Sunday school story that he had been telling me for years about the purpose of men and women on earth, which is to procreate as husband and wife. But how could he be so blind? How could he have not noticed there was something strange about his only child? The way I walked, the way I talked, it was clear to me at 11 years old, who I was, and was going to be for the rest of my life. Didn't my love for feminine accessories and toys ever since I was younger, trigger something within his mind? Or was he too busy trying to save other people's lives, failing to acknowledge that charity begins at home? My dad was raised within a Christian home, whereby his grandparents he grew up with were both members of the only church that was in Guyana at that time, in the early 1960s. He would tell me stories of how many miles he and his grandparents would have to walk to go and give God praises, and how much he hated it, but would still do it because he had no choice. Not knowing that he would have become a pastor in the future, and also found and married the woman of his dreams, which was the daughter of another couple that were also members of the church he attended. An angel in the front row. That was how my father had described my mother to his grandparents, the first time he had seen her at church. They would also make jokes of how much he wanted to go to church, just so that he could stare at my mom and smile at her, as she would smile back at him. They became best of friends as time went by, and with the approval of his grandparents and her parents, they were married after a few years of courting. They were happy and most of all everything had happened just as my father had imagined, from that first day of him laying his eyes on her. They were in love with each other, and after they got married, that love they shared evolved into something celestial when I was born. My birth took Dad back to the first time he saw an angel in the front row. My dad told me how Mom admired me for hours with a smile on her face, before putting me to bed. My mom died when I was only 3 years old in a plane crash, so I never got to know her, neither do I remember anything about her. My dad and aunt raised me. Well, mostly my aunt, since my father would spend most of his time in the church, and would only get home in time to kiss me goodnight before I went to bed. I've heard numerous stories about my mother, of how much she loved and cared for other people's children, and wanted nothing but the best for her friends and family. So I know for a fact that she would have accepted me just the way I am, just as she made me, and wouldn't have judged or even tried to change who I've grown to become. I even heard stories from family members that my mom wanted to have a baby girl, but instead I was born, a beautiful baby boy whom she loved dearly and named Josh. I was born with male features, but with mostly female emotions and hormones, and it wasn't my fault, it was God's work. He made me like this. Because my dad was a pastor, people didn't suspect anything when girls would try to talk to me, and I would always refuse their friendship, or how I was always neatly dressed. Some thought it was because my father was an upstanding man of God, and I wanted to do the right thing, by abstaining from premarital sex. That wasn't the true reason though. The truth was I was physically and emotionally attracted to guys like myself, and I realized this in high school. Some friends and I were playing a game of truth or dare and I was dared to kiss a girl. After kissing her, although it was my first kiss ever, I knew from then that I never wanted to kiss another girl again. While kissing her, my mind just diverted into picturing it was a male I was kissing instead of her. As I grew older, a lot of other events unfolded which convinced me that I was never going to live my father's dream, and be the son he thought he had. Was I wrong to be like this, all because somewhere in the process of my kind being conceived, it was embedded in us to be emotionally and physically attracted to the same sex? I do believe in God. I believe that God made me this way for a reason, and I was going to live my life and be true to myself regardless to what anyone had to say. I've been living a lie my entire life, but today was going to be the day that I come out of the closet, as many would say. Today was the day that I was ready to look my dad in his eyes and tell him that I'm gay and I'm happy with myself. I'm tired of living a lie. Today is the day that I evolve into the person I was. I was prepared to let the entire world know that for the rest of my life, I will be gay. Today was that day. All these thoughts were in my head that Saturday morning as I lay on my bed and reflected on my life to date. I really was going to do it today, so I got up and got myself prepared. I was supposed to meet my dad for breakfast that morning at his church, as was customary on weekends, before doing my volunteer work. I would volunteer to help the younger children with their activities every Saturday at a summer camp, at my father's church. I had volunteered to assist with the children, and it was a personal choice birthed from my love for kids. I loved to see them smile, while they would play, and also most of these children didn't have older siblings, or even parents to give them that love a child would need at their age. I tried my best to make them feel special, and to keep a smile on their face. I got up and before getting dressed, I stood in front of my wardrobe mirror and stared deeply into my eyes, as I would normally do every morning before leaving my house. It was something one of my classmates had encouraged me to do. He called it soul searching, and advised that I should do it every morning. He said that my eyes were the gateway to my heart, and could reveal many hidden truths about oneself. He also admonished that it was better done naked. So I did this for many years. I definitely found my soul by just looking into my own eyes, worked every time. I got dressed quickly and left the house. The short walk to the bus stop seemed long as I was re-examining myself. I kept asking myself if this was the right time to do this. Should I even do this? Would he find out on his own? And a small voice in my head kept telling me that it was the right thing to do, and although I was nervous, I felt it was the opportune time. I needed to stop being a betrayal to my own self. I needed to be true to me. So I continued my journey. I got to the bus stop at 10:03 that morning, and was scheduled to meet with my dad for breakfast at 10:30. The bus ride was a little over 20 minutes to get to the church. About 5 minutes, I saw a bus approaching. I was nervous. I wanted to take my time to get to my father's church, but once it got closer, I realized that it was not in service. I was relieved. I stood at the bus stop for another 15 minutes with no bus in sight, and knowing how much my father takes time serious, I was getting annoyed, because I knew after waiting so long for the bus, even if it came now and I was to board it, I would still be late and my father would be upset with me. So I decided to take a cab, and got to the church just in time to meet with my dad for breakfast. What I had planned, and was hoping for, was the best outcome. But it ended up being the worst decision I've made till then. After telling my father the truth about my sexuality in his office, nothing has ever been the same with him and I. He sat there for a while as if he was lost for words, and as he looked at me, I could have seen the disappointment and anger within his eyes. He then advised me to leave his office, and said that it would be best for me to leave his home also, because he didn't make a daughter and that he would never accept a gay son. I left his office in tears and began walking to the bus stop with 1,000 thoughts going through my mind. Although I had done what I wanted to do, deep down inside I was angry with myself for the pain that I saw in my father's eyes. I got to the bus stop, and was there for a few minutes, and noticed two of the kids that attended the church summer school were also waiting on the bus. Both Gwen and Maggie were standing a short distance away from me and from each other, but once the bus had arrived we all boarded it together. Gwen: "Hey Mom, I'm in class, I can't talk right now." This was how I answered my cell phone that Saturday morning, while I was in summer school at church, when I saw my mother calling. "What you mean you can't? Get up. I need to talk to you now," she replied. She sounded very aggressive. I could tell that she was angry, so I asked to be excused and left the classroom to go speak to her. "Hello Mom," I said. "Don't hello Mom me. What's this I'm looking at in your drawer? Are you pregnant? Is this for real?" She kept asking questions breathlessly, without giving me a chance to respond. I could hear the anger and disappointment in her voice, as she spoke harshly to me. She told me that I had to leave her home. She was not prepared to take care of a child who was bringing a child. She lamented that I disgraced her. The last thing I remembered her saying before I hung up the phone, was that I was a disappointment to her and to Dad. My name is Gwen Rashida Thomas, I was 15 years old at that time, and I'm the third child for my parents. I had two older brothers, who were already living on their own. Our parents always taught us how to be independent while giving us the necessary resources to do so, but still they never spoiled us. They both were very disciplined parents, that always enforced respect for others within us. As soon as my brothers had both graduated from college, they began renting separate apartments, and had good paying jobs, which inspired me to do the same, once I was finished with school. I've been living with my mom ever since my parents had divorced 6 years ago on mutual understanding, as my mom would tell us whenever we asked. I wasn't old enough to choose which parent I wanted to live with. My dad was always traveling for work. My parents both decided that it would be best for me to live with my mom. I would visit my dad on holidays and during school breaks. He moved to Region 1 to live because of his job. Going to visit my dad would take a day of traveling by bus, but hours by plane from where we lived in Region 4. This summer I didn't visit my dad because his job had sent him overseas for a few months for work, so I stayed with my mom and was enjoying my summer vacation, like any other 15-year-old girl would do. I was a fourth form student at Tutorial High School, a small school that was located on Wolford Avenue in Georgetown, just minutes from where I lived. It was at Tutorial High where I met and fell in love with Abel. I didn't personally know him, but knew of him for a couple of years by seeing him around the school, and knowing of how popular he was because of his athletics skills, and one day we just connected. Abel was always awarded champion boy, whenever we would have our annual school athletics events. He was so sweet, his demeanor and attitude made him extra special. He was definitely a teacher's pet. I remembered us having so much fun every day in and out of school, and what I was feeling for Abel I had never felt it before in my entire life. It was like I couldn't go a day without hearing his voice or not seeing his face, and that affection we shared for each other led to us having sex. He was my first, and it felt so special. I loved him and loved what we did, although I knew it was wrong for us to be sexually active that young, and how much my family would have been disappointed in me, if they were to ever find out. Especially my mom, she would have killed me, but my insurmountable feelings for Abel allowed me to continue. The consequences of my careless actions didn't resonate, so we continued to have fun. We were not just having sex, but most irresponsibly, we were having unprotected sex. Too young and too foolish to understand that we were both putting each other's future at risk, and what I had feared more than anything else happened. I missed my period. I was so scared at first, but since my mom and I would have regular talks about menstrual cycles, and how it could change from time to time for numerous reasons, I figure I would have it late, since I was now sexually active and it never came for that month, so I just pretended that I was using my sanitation pads, but instead I was throwing them out. I went another month without seeing my period again and got more scared, but I couldn't tell my mom. So I just pretended to have it around the time that it would normally come and continued to get rid of the pads as if I was using them. By the 3rd month of me missing yet another period, I was certain something was wrong. I knew now I was pregnant. My body had changed both physically and mentally, and I was still trying to keep it from my mother. I remember telling Abel what had happened, and we both decided that we weren't ready for a baby. I was just 15 years old and him being only 16 years old. We were definitely not ready to become parents, so we decided that I was going to have an abortion, before anyone else finds out about my pregnancy. One day, Abel and I went to see one of his aunts, who worked at a local clinic, to run some test on me, and we found out that I was 3.5 months pregnant. I wasn't surprised at all by the results, but only disappointed with myself, for not only being so irresponsible but also what was going to be my next decision, which was to abort my first child. Although it was something I had given prior thoughts to, I was still a little scared, but I wasn't risking the chance of this news getting back to my parents, especially my mom. We both told his aunt that I wanted to have an abortion, but the clinic she worked at didn't perform abortions. His aunt lectured me about the risks of going through with my decision. She also told me that having an abortion at such a young age could result in complications around getting pregnant in the future. I had already made my decision, so she recommended me to another clinic where her best friend worked, so that I could have it done there for free on the following Monday. His aunt gave us a paper to take to her friend before we left. It was basically a medical slip about my conditions, and what needs to be done, since she had already done most of the tests. I took the slip and placed it into my jeans pocket as we left the clinic that day. I was so nervous to go home because I knew that I couldn't have told my mom that I was having sex, and even worse to tell her that I was having unprotected sex, and that I was pregnant. She would have been so disappointed in me, because she spoke to me about sex a lot, and of how it could affect my life, not only from catching a STD, but also your body, if you weren't physically ready. I went home that afternoon and acted normal. I did my homework, all my chores, and even made dinner. Mom was working late that Friday night, but what I didn't get a chance to do was the laundry. The next morning, I woke up and got prepared for summer school, which was held at the local church in our community every summer. This was my first time attending summer school, since this was my first time spending my summer vacation with my mom. I kissed Mom goodbye that morning, after eating breakfast, while still trying to act normal before leaving the house. I couldn't have even looked her in her eyes while saying "I love you, Mom." I was too guilty of the fact that I had let her down, so I took off quickly. I arrived for summer school at 10 o'clock that morning. We started by telling the class how we spent our week, then we would get straight into doing group projects, which would go for an hour and a half. Although I was having fun in summer school that morning, the thought of me being pregnant and having to do an abortion was taking over my mind, but for some strange reason I was controlling my emotions very well. I was actively involved in the group as was the others, and it was going very well. At 11:05 a.m. we got a 15 minutes break. Upon reconvening, we continued on our group project, which I was still enjoying, since I love solving puzzles and was a team player. My cell phone rang. It was my mom who was calling me, so I answered it quietly. "Hey Mom, I'm in class, I can't talk right now." This was how I answered my cell phone that Saturday morning, while I was in summer school at church, when I saw my mother calling. "What you mean you can't? Get up. I need to talk to you now," she replied. She sounded very aggressive. I could tell that she was angry, so I asked to be excused and left the classroom to go speak to her. "Hello Mom," I said. "Don't hello Mom me. What's this I'm looking at in your drawer? Are you pregnant? Is this for real?" She kept asking questions breathlessly, without giving me a chance to respond. I could hear the anger and disappointment in her voice, as she spoke harshly to me. She told me that I had to leave her home. She was not prepared to take care of a child who was bringing a child. She lamented that I disgraced her. The last thing I remembered her saying before I hung up the phone was that I was a disappointment to her and to Dad, which instantly melted my heart. I stood in the church compound for a few seconds crying, not knowing what to do, or what to say, or whom to turn to. I went back into the classroom, grabbed my bag, and took off, not knowing where I was going or where I would have ended up, with 1,000 selfish thoughts flowing through my mind. The one thought that kept replaying itself in my mind the most, was the one that was advising me to take my own life. I was having suicidal thoughts to end not only my pain, but also the pain I have brought upon my mother and father once he found out about my pregnancy. I ran to the bus stop and noticed the pastor's son Josh was there, and was also waiting on the bus, so I stood a little distance from him to avoid him from noticing my teary eyes. I was still in tears, still disappointed in myself and scared of what was going to be the outcome of this situation. Maggie. I got to the Mandela and Norton Street bus stop that Saturday morning, still angry, still with tears in my eyes, with an uncertain feeling of whom I was. I noticed Josh and Gwen was also at the bus stop waiting for the bus to arrive. They both were members of the church I attended. I didn't personally know Josh, but I knew he was our pastor's son. Josh was also one of our summer school teachers. He was always neatly dressed, with a cute smile on his face. That Saturday he wore a frown, as if something was wrong. Gwen and I attended the same high school, but weren't personal friends. She was in a higher grade than I was, but whenever I saw her at school she would always say hi to me. Gwen seemed like a quiet person. I've never seen her with many friends. The bus came and we all boarded it. We sat some distance from each other. As I sat down I immediately began to reflect on what brought me to the point of contemplating suicide. Why was I having such selfish thoughts? Not considering how my death would break the hearts of my loved ones. But no one knew what I was feeling, and how exhausted I was for being bullied and picked on. My name is Magdalena Vernanda Singh, but my friends and family call me Maggie. I don't know the story of how I ended up with a Polish name. I was born in Trinidad and Tobago, and was raised in St. Clair, a town that's located in the capital city of Port of Spain. My parents were of East Indian descent and their parents and grandparents were from India. I managed to do some research on my first name and was pleased with what I found out about what it meant. Magdalena was a character from the New Testament, and besides it was given to me by the two persons I loved most. I didn't question them much about the name. I was 11 years old at the time, and had lived my entire life in Trinidad and Tobago, before moving to Georgetown, Guyana. I never imagined that I would have moved to live in another country. Trini to the bone was my favorite slang. It was also the name of one of my favorite soca songs. I loved my culture very much, and everything that it was made up of. I love the people, the music, the food, the beaches, and of course my favorite time of the year was the carnival season. Trinidad and Tobago has the keys to my heart, and will always be home for me. I love my country dearly. My life in Trinidad wasn't the best, but I certainly enjoyed being around my family and friends, because they understood and accepted who I was, and never judged or made fun of me. I was born with a skin disorder that caused my skin color to change from my normal dark complexion to a lighter tone. My parents noticed it when I was 3 years old, but the local doctors were unaware of what type of skin pigment it was, but after numerous researches and several checkups, they told my parents it was called vitiligo. Vitiligo is a condition that causes depigmentation of parts of the skin, and the cause of vitiligo is still unknown. Vitiligo is not contagious, which was a good thing, but it still had a big effect on my entire existence, for the good and for the bad. By the time I was 8 years old, it had already spread to several parts of my body, including my face. Having it spread to my face was the hardest for me, since I couldn't have covered up my face while I was in school, like I did to the rest of my body. At just 8 years old, I was the laughing stock for my entire school because of my condition. The name-calling wasn't just harsh, but it seemed as if that era of my life was never going to end. It was horrific. I was teased every day for 2 terms, while being at school, after my condition had spread across my face. I immediately began to isolate myself. I didn't go outside to play or go to any social gatherings, except for school and church. I was teased at church also, but it wasn't as blatant as it was while I was in school. My parents and sisters would always try their best to comfort me, whenever I was sad because of the name calling. They did everything they could have done to show me I was still beautiful, even with my condition, and would always tell me that one day the name calling would end, and it certainly did happen. I got some new friends at school, and was making more friends every day while at school and church. I really didn't know what had happened, but I was grateful that the other kids were now treating me as one of their fellow peers and not as an outcast. 6 months before my 12th birthday, my dad was offered a job in the capital city of Guyana, by the United Nations. My dad had been working with the UN for a number of years, as an education developer, and would travel from time to different countries to conduct seminars. This time, instead of only going overseas for a couple of days, he was offered a 5-year contract to continue in the same capacity but to be stationed in Guyana, in which he accepted immediately. My dad knew my mom so well, he knew she would advise him to take the job, even if it meant we would have had to move to another country. My parents were very excited about this new opportunity that my dad was given, and it wasn't only because of the fact that the remuneration was handsome, but also because my parents were ecstatic about us getting a better education, since they both were educators. Dad had a critical role in the sector and Mom was a social worker. As for me and my sisters, we were always supportive of our parents' decisions, since they always knew what was best for us. But was also a little upset, since this meant that we would have had to leave everything behind, including our family and friends, and start a new life. We arrived at the Chetty Jagan International Airport in mid-April. Astonishingly, upon disembarking the aircraft, I felt as if I was still in Trinidad. Guyana's culture was very similar, just as my parents had told us, and that gave me more confidence that we would have blended in very quickly. The UN had arranged for us to be picked up from the airport and taken to our new home, which was located in the capital city in a small community called Prashad Nagar. Prashad Nagar was a 45-minute drive from the airport, just like the flight from Trinidad to Guyana, and was considered a residential community, since the properties in the area were very expensive and newly constructed. The weekend we got to Guyana was the Easter weekend, and the UN invited our family to several activities. We attended those activities and had a great time socializing with the local people that were from the city. I had a really good time, and was open to being teased, but it didn't happen at any of the events we attended. I was flabbergasted. Within 2 weeks me and my sisters were all enrolled in schools, and were scheduled to start on the following Monday. Since they both were older than I was, they were sent to a different school. We all were anxious and nervous to attend school since this was a new environment for us, and honestly didn't know what to expect, but our parents told us to go with an open mind, in which I did. I can't speak for my sisters, but my first few weeks at school were horrible. I was open to my parents. They would always try to comfort me. The name calling and the slurs caused me to relieve that time in Trinidad, where I was called all sorts of names, but this was worse. They didn't just make fun of my skin disorder, they made fun of the way I dressed, walked, and mostly, my deep Trini accent, but that wasn't half of what I was going through. I was now a victim of bullyism. This was new to me, since I never had any encounter with kids who would gang up, and take my lunch money every day. They even took my pretty earrings I had received from my grandmother, as a parting gift. My parents tried to comfort me and tried their best to make me believe that it was going to be over soon, and they will eventually be friendly to me. It never happened, instead the situation deteriorated. My classmates would leave notes on my desk, saying how ugly I look and sounded. My parents visited the school and made several complaints, but nothing changed, so they decided after school was out for summer, I would only do homeschool. I did not fancy the idea of homeschooling. I wanted a normal school life, I wanted to make friends. I became a regular absentee, and before I knew it, spring was over and it was about to be summer, and school was out. My parents had heard about a summer school camp that a neighborhood church would do each year and decided to enroll me into the program. They both thought that it being a religious activity, the kids would have been nicer to me and more considerate of my feelings, unlike the students at my previous school, but they were both wrong. It was even worse, it was my first and last day attending that camp. What I was greeted by was unexplainable and uncalled for. My parents dropped me off at 10:15 that morning and stayed with me till 10:30, the proposed starting time of the program. As I entered the classroom it was normal, and I was in shock, since I was expecting to be teased, but it was all an act by my classmates. Our teacher was a church member and nobody wanted anything negative to get back to their parents, so I guess they must have plotted for me at break time. I was sitting on the eastern side of the school by the fence having a snack, and watching the other students playing. I then heard a giggling that was coming from behind me, but didn't pay much attention to it, until it began getting closer and closer, and as soon as I turned around to see what it was, splosh! My face was covered in what I later found out was polish. Some kids thought it would be funny to attempt to give me back my real complexion, and also to humiliate me. So they mixed some brown polish in a small container and tossed it in my face. I began to run, and as I was running all I heard was laughter and more giggling. I ran to the bathroom and quickly washed my face, before heading to the classroom to get my bag to leave. I was embarrassed. I had had it to my neck with the insults. I was sick and tired of what I looked like. I went to the bus stop and patiently waited for the bus, with the intention of going home and solving my own problem. Ron. I've already tried to kill myself 3 times before my 15th birthday, twice last year and once this year. I'm telling this story because unfortunately those attempts were unsuccessful, which made me question myself after getting off that bus that Saturday afternoon. Did I really want to die, or was I only seeking attention? I thought about death whenever I was having a rough time in life. Once I got through that stage, death didn't exist in my thoughts anymore, but my entire life was what I would call rough. Death was often on my mind. I would look at everything in life from the same angle and would always take the same approach when it comes to dealing with them all. Whether it was the rush I got from feeling pain or taking drugs, my poverty inheritance that was cast upon me from my parents or my abusive uncle, I had a carefree attitude when I was dealing with them. I was living with my uncle who didn't care about me or my well-being, and was only doing my grandparents a favor by letting me stay with him, because my parents had both died from overdoses. At just 18 years old, death haunted my mind the way I wish the devil would be haunting my parents in hell, for being so neglectful to me, while I was just a little boy growing up. How could parents not care for their 5-year-old son? How could they have done those horrible drugs in my presence? How could they forget about me and die? The hatred I had for my parents because of what I saw them doing, was primary compared to the hatred I had for them because of what they've embedded into my genes from birth. As I grew older I found out that I was my parents' son, I was their true offspring, as my uncle would tell me from time to time. I began taking drugs at 11 years old and couldn't live without them. I quickly became an addict and had to deal with the consequences that came with that lifestyle. I wasn't only walking exactly in my parents' footsteps, but most horribly I was wearing both their shoes. I realized that sooner or later I would have ended up at the same destination that my parents' journey ended at, but I refused to acknowledge my own conscience. I dropped out of school and got arrested, because I had no job, so I did whatever it was I had to do in order to satisfy my drug addiction. Whether it was stealing or gambling, I had to get drugs. Sometimes reality would hit me and make me realize that I'm just like my parents, causing me to feel like a hypocrite because I hated them for the exact things I was doing. I had no control of my genetic inheritance, so I only continued to live my parents' white dream fantasies, which was only killing me slowly. I was no different from my parents. I would think sometimes, but temporary self-consciousness would lead me into thinking about suicide, which made me want to take my own life, in which I've tried several times before. I remember staying over at my friend's house. I was too high to find my way home after a long night of us doing different drugs, so he allowed me to crash on his couch that Friday night. The next morning I woke up still feeling drowsy and very hungry and a little intoxicated. I then decided that I was going to head home and get some breakfast. We had already eaten all of the food that his mom had made to last him over the weekend. I had to walk about 4 long blocks to get to the bus stop from his house, which made me feel even worse, so as soon as I got to the bus stop I immediately took a seat. My stomach began to pain me severely, and it felt as if I had to use the bathroom, so since there was no bus in sight I began walking back to my friend's house to use his bathroom. I spent the next 30 minutes in his bathroom and once I was finished I immediately left since I felt even hungrier than I did before. I left his house and once I got back to the bus stop, I stood there for about 2 minutes before noticing that a bus was in sight. It came up to the stop and I boarded it. Jamie. I seriously don't remember how I got to that pharmacy, but what I do remember was what I had gone there for, and how I was going to execute my plan that Saturday afternoon, after getting back home. I wanted it to be fast and painless, so I bought some strong prescription pills, that were going to make my death come quickly. Is giving up after 25 years even possible? That was the unanswered question that dragged me to the pharmacy, which was the thought that caused my heart to be in tremendous pain. That was also the thought that I wanted to live without, ever since my husband, who was also the father of our 2 beautiful kids, told me 2 days ago that he wants a divorce. He said he was no longer in love with me, and he's ready to move on with his life and his new mistress. My name is Jamie Bankertom and what I've learned about life, is that it's livable, so just live it. I'm the mother of 2 beautiful children, Jay, who was 18 years old, and Janning, who had just turned 16 years old, at that devastated time in my life. I love my son and daughter unconditionally, and would die for them, as any mother would do for their children. I also had an unconditional and undying love for their father, my soulmate, my husband and very best friend for 25 years, Jake Tom. Jake and I basically grew up in the same community. Our parents had known each other for a very long time, since his father worked for my father's construction company, for many years before his passing. As a young woman, I never thought for a second that I would have fell in love or even marry Jake. Of course I wanted to get married, but I always thought it would have been with a wealthy guy, and not to the son of one of my dad's laborer. Jake and his family were considered as the minority in the community, so I never paid him any mind if I would see him, whenever his dad would bring him to work. Besides, they were my father's employees, so it was definitely forbidden for me to even be around them, but that was all about to change within minutes. One night my parents had an argument, and it was a terrible one. They've had several arguments before, but this time I saw my dad getting physical with my mother. My father was hitting her continuously, and there was nothing I could have done about it, so I decided to leave the house. I remember running and running until I got to a nearby gas station, that was located about 20 minutes from where we lived. I took a seat in the parking lot. I didn't know what to do next, who to call or where to go, since we had no family that was living close by. I then heard a voice that said, "Jamie, is that you?" I quickly wiped my eyes, looked around and saw it was Jake. He was coming towards me, and as he got closer, he must have noticed my glossy eyes, and asked if I was okay, and what was bothering me. "Nothing," I quickly replied with a strong and repellent tone, but he still was determined to find out what I was doing on the streets at 8 at night. He knew my parents would have never allowed me to go anywhere alone in broad daylight, let alone so late. I then turned my face, got up and began walking, and he decided to follow me, although I told him that I was going to be okay walking back home alone. Jake didn't take my word for it and insisted that he accompanied me back to my house, to make sure that I got there safely. We walked back to my house, and something remarkable happened that night. After walking and talking for a few minutes with Jake, he had my heart. He was so different than I could have ever imagined. Jake's sense of humor, the way he spoke, his choice of words and his demeanor, all showed me a different side of him than what my parents had taught me all my life about his kind of people. Jake was charming, very humble, and a person with lots of dreams and aspirations. We became very close friends and began spending more time together, unknown to my parents. Although his parents would tell him to keep away from me, he would always disobey them and see me whenever he could. What happened next was inevitable. I think we both knew what was the next chapter for us, but were allowing it to happen naturally, and it did. It was very natural. From being very close friends to becoming first loves, Jake was my first kiss and I wanted him to be my last kiss also. We was having so much fun, and strangely, his father thought by telling my parents about our relationship, it would have saved him his job, as opposed to finding out from someone else. Oh boy! He was wrong. Upon finding out about Jake and me, my father fired his dad on the spot, which was unfortunate. My parents were totally against us and was doing everything to keep us from seeing each other. My dad even threatened to send me away, but that didn't stop us from seeing each other. A few weeks went by, and whether I got away to go see him, or snuck him into my room at nights, we saw each other. We were inseparable and loved every moment with each other. One night my parents had a huge argument. My mom left the house very angry, and it was strange, because Mom would never leave the house once she and my father were arguing. Whenever they would argue, my mom would always stay in, and try to solve whatever problems they were having between them, even when Dad would get physical with her. I got worried after 2 hours passed, and Mom didn't return home, neither did she call to let us know that she was okay. I then got even more scared, when I realized that she didn't even took her cell phone with her when she left, so no one knew where she was. It was very scary. My dad started drinking, and was making numerous phone calls trying to find Mom, and then the worst thing happened. The doorbell rang at about 3:58 a.m. I was relieved, thinking it was my mom who had returned home, so I went downstairs to see her and found that it was 2 police officers. My dad was talking to them, and when I got downstairs, he looked at me and immediately dropped to his knees and began to cry. When I saw that, I froze, and I must have fainted. The next time I was conscious, I was lying in my bed. Mom was in a fatal accident. She had lost control of her car and ran into a bridge, and died on the spot. At just 17 years old, losing your mom was one of those things that you would never imagine happening, especially when she was your best friend. It was the worst feeling ever, and all I wanted to do was to die with her. I began to blame my dad every single day for my mom's death. I told him that I would never forgive him because it was him who caused her to leave the house that night. It was a very emotional time for me. I was losing tremendous weight, since I wasn't eating and was very depressed, not wanting to see or hear anything from anyone including my dad. Jake was the only person who could have comforted me. My dad saw that and decided to have him over to stay with me to help get me through my time of mourning. Jake agreed. My dad sat with the both of us a few weeks later and did the best thing that any father could have done for their unhappy daughter. He gave us his blessing and said that we should get married. He proposed what he was willing to assist Jake with in order to allow him to have a proper education and a career. Although Jake's parents thought that he was too young to get married, they still were supportive of his decisions and gave us their blessing also. We got married at just 18 years old. My wedding day was the best day of my life and also the worst day. My mom and I spoke often about weddings. Oh, how I wish she was there to see how beautiful I looked on my wedding day. My dad was well affiliated. He kept his word and used his connections to get Jake admitted to a local university to pursue legal studies. Jake did not disappoint. He studied hard and later became a lawyer. Our life together was always filled with fun and excitement, with unforgettable memories. We had our first child together, a beautiful baby boy that we decided to call Jay. 3 years later we had our second child, Janning. She was what we both were expecting, a gorgeous girl. We were a very happy family, and before you knew it the kids were all grown up and went off to college. Jake and I were still having fun as if we were sprung teenagers. We took vacations, did outings and everything else that we could have done to keep the joy within our marriage. The next thing we knew was that we were celebrating 2 decades of being married. We had a big party and renewed our vows in front of our close family and friends, and most importantly our 2 beautiful children. After that, Jake began getting a lot of international clients to work with. It started to get a tad lonely in our house. No kids around, no husband to cuddle with at nights. Our family communicated daily, and for that I was grateful. Just hearing their voices, whether it was, "Mommy I love you" from the kids, or "I love you babe" from Jake. Jake traveled for over 4 years on and off. Despite his absence, I never got the urge to step out of our marriage or even thought about being unfaithful to him. I knew he loved me and thought he would have never jeopardized our marriage. Hell, I was so wrong. I was only wishing in vain for 25 years. Jake had been overseas for a few days and was scheduled to return the following Thursday, which he did, but the Jake that came home that Thursday wasn't the same Jake that I had known for 25 years. It wasn't the Jake that I had loved ever since I was 18 years old. Something was wrong. Jake was wrong. He came into the house, went straight to our room and started packing. He said to me it was over between us and that he's moving on. I was in complete shock while asking him and myself what had I done, but all he said was he's not in love with me anymore, his heart belongs to someone else. As I watched him leave, I remember not ever feeling this way since the passing of my mother. The pain was unexplainable, uncalled for, and too much to bear. I certainly couldn't call my kids and break their heart. It would have been the wrong thing to do. They were at school studying, and I wasn't that inconsiderate of their feelings. My father, on the other hand, had a tendency of reminding me of things that he had warned me about in the past, and I knew exactly what he would have told me, so I didn't call him. I isolated myself and began to take pills every day to numb the pain. I would pass out for hours, then I was awakened to my reality. I was tired and I wanted to end my pain permanently, so that Saturday, I took off to the nearest pharmacy. I got to the pharmacy and instead of buying the regular painkillers, I bought some very strong pills. Pills I reckoned would stop my heart after I consumed them all. I was blank. I didn't even remember how I got to the pharmacy, but recognizing that I did not drive to get there, I began walking to the bus stop. It was not too far from the pharmacy. As I was approaching the bus stop, the bus was already there and was about to pull off, but the driver saw me coming and decided to wait for me. That was my first time boarding a bus in my entire life. I didn't know anything about taking public transportation. I got onto the bus and took a seat after saying good day to the bus driver. Lovey. Why does it feel like the end is near and the only thing that's comforting me right now is this hospital bed that I've been laying in for 3 days now? Where's everyone? Where are those people that I've comforted in their times of need? Where are those lips that should be by my side whispering, "Don't worry, it's going to be okay," as I did for many people throughout my life? But most of all, where's Jenny when I need her the most? People have all the wonderful and unnecessary things they pray for daily, but all I've remember praying for ever since I was a little girl was to be loved and appreciated unconditionally. As a child, I never felt what it was like to be loved and embraced by anyone, not even by my own parents. My dad left my mom when I was just a little child and never came back, and my loving mother had her own life to live. My mother's life was obviously more important than her taking time out to teach her 11-year-old daughter some basic things about life, like to put her education first and to use a condom while having sex. She could have even taught me that having one sexual partner at a time was the right thing to do, and that advice would have had a solid impact on my life. Those simple advices would have made a big difference on my perception on life, but instead I had to find out all of that and more on my own, in which I didn't regret. I've grown into becoming a beautiful, mature woman, who's well educated and is doing very well for myself in life. I wasn't born attracted to the same sex. It was something that happened over time and something that I choose to do, because of how many times I've been hurt by guys in the past. I would always blame myself since I was a very gullible girl who was looking for that similar love to what a father would give to his daughter that I had never felt before. I was being so blinded by my own fantasies. I spent half my life being taken advantage of while looking for love in all the wrong places. Guys blatantly took advantage of me by telling me whatever they knew I wanted to hear just to have their way with me, and it certainly worked. Their words were like a snake charmer to a snake. They made me dance, they made me sleep, they even made me pay them to be in their presence. They were my real-life puppeteers. I was like a dead fish, just going with the flow, not knowing where I was going to end up, but my destination would always be the same, the welcoming Heartbreak Hotel. I don't know if I should say love or say infatuation, but they all made me feel good in the beginning just by them telling me how much they love me, and how much they adore me. Those were the words that were missing from my life, so whenever I heard them, even if I had doubts about the person that would say them to me, I felt as if I was being loved and adored. But me being loved and adored was never really happening. Instead I was being used and abused, and it was all consented. I've had my heart broken over and over and over again by men of different races, religions, and different cultures, and got sick and tired of that repetitive life I was living. I thought to myself that it was time for a change, and after days of thinking about it, I came to the conclusion that it was time to date girls. It was time to give the same sex a chance to see if they could give me the love and affection I needed, while at the same time feel the pain I was going through as an abused woman. I was tired of being physically and verbally abused by men, so a change was vital for my life. I decided to start attending only lesbian promotion parties and gatherings in the city, and would always be fascinated by the things I would see at those parties. It was my first encounter with stuff like this. It was a whole new community of women that were living their life to the fullest, while loving and caring for the same sex. I felt as if I was in the right place after socializing with them for a few months and going to every event that I heard of. But although I was looking for a partner, I never allow myself to make it obvious, so I would always just keep my cool and try to have a good time while I was at the parties. I then met Jenny. I thought to myself, this must be God's work, because we didn't meet at any of those parties that I was constantly attending while hoping to find someone. We met at Stabroek bus park. One Friday afternoon after work while I was heading to the gym, and like any guy would have done, she approached me and complimented me on my smile, which made me blush, of course. We then began talking and eventually exchanged numbers before my ride came. Jenny was a very charming young lady, and although she dressed manly, she had something that differentiated her from any guy I've ever been with. There was something about her that I couldn't explain with words, but it was definitely something I wanted to be a part of me, so I didn't hesitate to make it happen. She was very confident in everything she did, and I enjoyed being in her presence because of how secure she would make me feel every time we were together. She basically knew exactly what to do and what to say to not only make me feel special, but also appreciated at the same time. She was very gifted. Jenny treated me as if she understood every part of me. It was as if we were friends for a very long time and was just rejuvenating a long-lost friendship, and that had me feeling ecstatic at every single moment we would spend together. We began spending more and more quality time together while getting to know each other, and eventually couldn't go a day without hearing each other's voice or seeing each other. Jenny was single and so was I, so we both decided to put a title on our relationship and make each other our main focus after weeks of courting. We had a perfect relationship, the intimacy was great, the communication level was high, and most of all we became best friends, so we basically talked and joked around all day. At times I would ask myself if it was real. I couldn't believe I was so in love with another woman like myself, and the love that I got in return was unbelievable. The love she gave to me was priceless and heartwarming. It was mine for the taking, so I took it and ran. I was running on the track of love with no finish line in sight. Happy days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months, and before we knew it, we were together for almost 3 years. We were still having fun, still loving every second of each other as if it was only yesterday we had fell in love. Jenny was happy and so was I, and I would thank God daily for sending her into my life. She restored my faith in love and commitment. It was always a grateful feeling being with her. We had a conversation one night about adopting a kid, since we both thought that it would strengthen our relationship. We both also wanted to be proud parents, but after hours of talking about it and researching the requirements for adopting a child, we thought it would have been easier for me to have a sperm donor. I had always wanted to experience childbirth and what it felt like to nurture my own child, so I was totally for the sperm donor choice we both decided on. We got the sperm donor and everything went well. I became pregnant and our relationship got stronger, and we were very happy. Jenny was so overprotective of me and our unborn child that she had already demanded that whenever I get to 6 months of my pregnancy, I will have to stop work and just be home. At first I was hesitant in agreeing with her because of the numerous responsibilities I had at my job, but I did because we always compromise for each other. I knew Jenny was just concerned about our baby's well-being and me, so as soon as I got to 6 months I took some time off from going into work, and was partially working from home. Working from home was much more relaxing than to be in the building managing over 150 employees. One day, I went into work to pick up my paycheck and it was very busy because of the holiday sale that was coming up the next day, and the clothing section of the store was short of staff. One of my co-managers asked me if I could stay for a few hours to help out on the sales floor, in which I agreed to do after consulting Jenny about it. Although she was kind of against it at first, she eventually agreed and begged me to be extra careful and not to stay too long. I began to work at the cash register and stayed there for about an hour. I then got a call from the aisle to assist a customer with a price check. When I got to the sales floor I began looking for the customer who needed the assistance, and that was the last thing I remembered. I don't remember what happened next, but what I do remember was waking up on a hospital bed covered in blood with Jenny sitting on my right-hand side in tears. I asked her what had happened and she said very calmly, "You killed our baby," which immediately made me feel horrible and empty inside. I became lost for words when I realized for myself what she was talking about, and what made the situation even worse was what happened next. Jenny began saying these unbelievably harsh things to me as if I wasn't suffering enough. She was blatantly blaming me for everything that had happened, and what hurt the most was she saying that it was over between us before leaving the room. A nurse heard what was going on and came into the room as Jenny was leaving. I asked her what had happened and she told me that I slipped at work and fell on my side, and because of how intense the fall was, I had an instant miscarriage. She also told me I would have to remain in the hospital for another day or so, and that I should get some rest. I began crying sorrowfully, so hurt and so disappointed with myself. The next day before being released from the hospital, I remember laying there just thinking of how lonely I was, with no one by my side, not even Jenny. I was released from the hospital and was expecting Jenny to be there to pick me up, but she wasn't. I took a cab back to our place not knowing what I was about to walk into. Jenny was in our home with her ex, and basically humiliated me in front of her, saying she wanted me out of the house and to leave her alone because it was over between us. I didn't believe what was going on, it made no sense to me whatsoever, and it made me felt confused and heartbroken. I felt as if I would have been better off dead at that time. The pain from not just losing my firstborn, but also Jenny giving up on us, was unbearable, and I had no one to turn to in this time for comfort. I might as well be dead because I can't handle this, was what I said to myself before walking out of our apartment. I walked towards the bus stop and stood there, not knowing what to do or who to call, or where to turn to, just lost. A little voice in my head was advising me to take my own life, because I would be better off and my pain would be eased. Part 2. Mandi. I arrived at the first stop at 9:48 a.m. and got my first passenger. It was an elderly couple that attended my church. We greeted each other before they got seated in the priority seats behind me. I continued to make my necessary stops and pickups, and before I knew it, I was at the last stop. Damn, I said to myself, was I really driving for an hour and a half already? It usually takes me 90 minutes to complete this zone from the first to last stop, but largely because there was a lot on my mind that morning, I wasn't keeping track of the time and it went by swiftly. I arrived at the last stop and took my usual 10 minutes break before turning the bus around to do another trip, then I decided to check my cell phone. I noticed I had several missed calls from various numbers, so I called home to check on my husband, but the calls went unanswered. My kids' phones kept ringing out. That got me worried. I then stood there for a few seconds in silence while thinking about all the wrong things that may be going on with my husband, but then it was time to head back on the road, so I did. I continued with my pickups, and after picking up about 5 passengers, the dispatcher radioed and requested that I let that be my last trip for the day and that I should report to the office. She said that another driver will be waiting to take over from me. She also informed that one of my daughters had called and stated that there was a family emergency. By then I was freaking out. I immediately began talking to God while driving and making my pickups. Dear God, you know I cannot handle any negative outcome of this situation that I'm in right now. Please cover my family with your blood. Continue to bless us with health and strength to continue your daily works as you've commanded. You know that we are true believers of your works. You know that we've been living your way, the way of righteousness. I pray, O Lord, help us, bless my husband, please see him through this. I believe in you, I live for you, we live for you. I must have been really into the prayers because I missed 2 stops on the journey. I had to pull myself together and refocus on the road, at least until I got to the bus terminal. I tried my best to take my mind off what I thought was happening, but it was hard to do. I then made another pickup and it was people that I knew from either being friends with my kids or they were members of my church. Josh was one of them. He boarded with 2 other persons and they all seemed very upset. Josh recognized me and said hello before taking a seat, but the other 2 kids just paid and rushed in. I continued to drive while wondering what was going on and still talking to God. I was taking forever to get to the base to be relieved. I was about 30 minutes away. I made another stop and it was a young lady that I had also recognized who boarded the bus with her baby. I waited for her to put away her baby's carriage and got seated, then took off. I was about 10 stops away from the kiddie bus terminal. By this time, I sighed with relief. Was not going to be long before I am there. There weren't any passengers waiting for the bus or no stop was requested for the first 2 stops after. There was a young man at the 3rd stop. I remembered him because he boarded the bus but didn't have enough money to make the full fare, and instead of saying anything to me, he looked at me with his teary eyes, walked to the back, and got seated. On a regular day I would have said something to him about being short of his fare, but I wasn't in the mood, so I took off. Something must have happened to me while I was driving. Either I nodded off for a quick second behind the wheel or I was too deep in my thoughts. I did not realize I was about to drive into a pothole, until after it happened, and that shook the bus a little and made a loud noise because of the impact that the wheel had dropped into it with. That noise was then followed by another loud noise. I later found out that it came from the back of the bus because after I heard it, I began hearing screaming and immediately stopped the bus. I pulled the bus over to see what was happening, and as I unstrapped my seatbelt and got out of my chair, the first thing I noticed was passengers running towards me screaming and begging me to open the door. I reached over my seat and pressed open the door, still not knowing what had happened, but after most of the passengers exited the bus, I then looked down to the back. What I saw was unbelievable. I myself began to scream in shock of what I was seeing in front of my eyes. Joyce. I got on the bus, nodded my head, walked to the back, and took a window seat to try and prevent any of the other passengers from seeing my teary eyes. Once I got seated, I realized that there were at least 2 more passengers who were sitting not too far from where I was. Paranoia is a real thing. They looked at me, but I felt like they were staring into my soul through my eyes. As I sat down, I was still feeling very lost, still in shock of what had happened moments ago. I didn't know what to do, but all I kept telling myself was that I'm the fault for what had happened. I should have known better. I should have known that he was never going to get over her. He did say that she was his lifey. He did tell me from the beginning that he did not know if he could ever stop loving her. These were his own words. Why did I take his words for granted? So many thoughts and unanswered questions danced in my mind, and the one thought that was dominant was the thought of ending it all, easing the pain, taking my own life. I had never felt like that before. I wanted it to stop. The bus got to the next stop, and as I looked up at the door, I saw it was Nettie who had come on with her newborn baby. Nettie and I were friends, we met in high school. I quickly nodded my head so that she would not notice my teary eyes. I started reasoning with God very quietly. Dear God, am I a bad person? Am I not humble and kind-hearted? How did this happen to me? Why did you allow me to cross paths with a monster? Why did you allow me to fall in love with this heartless man, knowing his heart belonged to someone else? How could I be so blind to reality, yet still had the perfect vision for a love that was never going to make me happy in the long run, for a love that was never mine, or a love that will probably haunt me for the rest of my life? How could you allow this to happen to your daughter? The bus then made another stop. Out of curiosity, I glanced at the door to see who was about to get on. It was a young man that boarded. He looked familiar, but I could not remember where it was that I knew his face from, so I nodded my head again. I slightly lifted my head and noticed that the young man was walking to the back of the bus. He took a seat next to another passenger, on the opposite side of where I was. You could have seen the anguish on his face, his eyes were very glossy. I noticed his teary eyes when our eyes met. I quickly nodded my head once more and continued talking to God quietly, and while doing that I heard a few gasps coming from the young man that had just boarded the bus. It sounded like when someone is crying, and as I was about to look up at him, the bus dropped into a pothole. There was a loud noise and the bus shook from side to side for a minute. Another loud noise could be heard almost simultaneously, this one rang my ears. It was as if someone rang the church bells over my ear as I slept. I looked up and could not believe my eyes and what had happened just inches away from me. I screamed, but my body was too frail to run off the bus as the other passengers did. Teddy. I got seated at the front of the bus in one of the priority seats, and my fiend started to roar. I began to crave alcohol. I reached into my pocket and realizing that I had none with me, so I bit my nails as I normally would do when I could not satisfy my yearnings for alcohol. I noticed every passenger that boarded the bus because each of them had to pass me to be seated. I paid attention to them all. Most of them didn't look at me, but I noticed a lot of frowns that afternoon. It was as if everyone was having a bad day. Hardly anyone said good morning to the driver or anything, they just paid and rushed to their seat. I took out a small book of quotes from my pocket that I always carried with me, but this wasn't just any book. This was a very special book. Marty gave it to me on our 8th wedding anniversary as a present. Marty went above and beyond to customize the book. Behind each page was a picture of us, and ever since her death, it has always been with me. One quote, one day, that was the name of the book. I read that book every day and was familiar with its contents. I usually read it in order since there was a quote for every day, but that Saturday I didn't. I took it out my pocket, opened it to a random page, and it was one of the quotes I never understood, although I've been reading that book for years, so I read it slowly, word by word, as if I was now learning to read. To be great is not to live forever with lots of powers and riches, but to die as a powerless righteous man is greatness. I sat there rereading that quote several times, trying to make sense of what I was reading, but like the other times I have read it, I did not fully understand what it meant. I was puzzled and lost in thoughts because of that quote. I closed the book, placed it back into my pocket, and started biting my nails again, while trying to control my cravings. A few more passengers came onto the bus, and I may have noticed one or two of them that I had seen before, but they all rushed to be seated like the earlier passengers. A familiar young lady came on board. I remembered her because she always offered me food or money whenever I saw her and her family at the department store. I didn't know her name, but she boarded the bus with a baby in a carriage. I got up and assisted her in stowing the carriage so that she could sit with the baby. She smiled and thanked me before sitting. I looked at her and smiled back, noticing her eyes were red and teary, but I figure with a smile like the one she wore, nothing was wrong. I didn't even bother to ask her if she was okay, instead I got seated and continued to bite my nails, while thinking about my destination and the quote that I had just read. I looked at her baby and noticed a beautiful smile plastered on the little face, while trying to figure out if it was a boy or girl. I couldn't tell because the baby was wrapped up in a blanket. It made me reminisce on my own kids at that age. Oh, what a joyous time that was to hold them in my arms, so innocent, so helpless yet so beautiful at the same time. One thought of my kids led to another thought and eventually Marty was cruising in my memory. I felt an unexplainable pain within my heart. I really missed them, and most of all I missed Marty. What happened next was unbelievable and maybe the work of God, because my life hasn't been the same since. As I sat there and thought about my family and how much I missed them, the driver must have drove over something in the street, because the bus then made a deafening and unpleasant sound. That sound was followed by another loud noise, which was followed by the sound of screaming from the passengers in the bus as they ran towards the front of the bus. I got up and looked at the back and was hurt at what I saw. Nettie. I got onto the bus and began taking Todd out of his carriage. Before I sat down, there was an elderly man who helped stow his carriage. I recognized him. He was a homeless guy that was always at the department store begging for loose change. I remember saying to myself, you don't know when you may need help and who will be the one helping you, that's why you should be nice to everyone you meet. I was very nice to this particular man whenever I would see him at the department store. I didn't know if he had recognized me, but I certainly recognized him and was grateful for his assistance with the carriage. I took a seat in one of the priority chairs that was located next to the carriage holder, on the opposite side of the driver's seat, someone whom I recognized also. The bus driver was a fellow church member, but I didn't know her personally, my parents did. As I sat down, I reflected on what happened while staring at my son's face, with teary eyes. Unsure of what to say or think, I began praying silently. I was taught to pray in good times and bad, to pray when you needed reassurance in life. Dear God, I would never question your actions or any situation you allowed to happen to me. I am a true believer. I believe that you don't only know what's good for your children but also that you don't give us more than we could handle. So tell me, Lord, how could someone be so cruel? How could he not want his own seed? How could he just stand there and be so heartless as if our son were a mistake, my mistake? Lord, I asked you to bless him and restore his faith, restore the love he once had for me within his heart and allow him to pass it on to his son. All I want him to do, Lord, is to love his son. It is not about me anymore. I don't want him to think it's about me. I just want what is best for my son, and that's to have a father figure in his life as I did. Fathers are essential. Please let my son know what it's like to have a father, O Lord. The bus stopped and I got distracted. I raised my head. The passenger that came on the bus looked as if he was in his mid-teens, 15, 16 years maybe. I saw his face as he walked past. He stared me in the face. It was as if he was trying to tell me something. His eyes too were teary, and his face had the look of someone who was begging for sympathy, but he quickly went to the back of the bus and took a seat. I continued talking to God, still begging him to restore some faith and love within Todd's heart so that he would be willing and able to be a part of his son's life. I also asked God to continue to bless him with health and strength to do this. It must have been about 5 minutes or maybe more since the bus had last stopped, and then it happened. The driver drove into what must have been a pothole. That hole caused the bus to make a deafening sound and caused the bus to shake a little. But the sound that came from the pothole was followed by another loud noise, a noise that sounded as if a firecracker had gone off inside of the bus. As I looked up to see what was happening, the passengers that were sitting at the back of the bus began screaming. It was unbelievable. What I saw before my very own eyes I could never forget. I too started screaming. Josh. As I sat down, I felt unsettled. I could not tell whether my internal organs had gone for a stroll or if they were fully functioning. I felt hollow. I heard that malevolent voice in my head, that was advising me to take my own life since it was worth nothing to my father. I wanted to be myself. I wanted to be the Josh God created, the gay Josh. I had no control over how I was born, but I do have control on how I live. If my own dear father can't accept me as I am, I would rather die than to wallow in the facade that kept me silent all these years. I remember telling this to myself, and that voice in my head kept agreeing with me. I was seriously contemplating suicide. I didn't want to think about anything else that was going to make my situation worse. I inserted my earplugs and listened to some of my favorite gospel music and mumbled with the tune. At the same time, I begged God to forgive me for my sins. Both past and future sins, to pardon me for my malicious thoughts, and after I would have committed suicide, to accept me into His paradise. I was almost through my 8th song and again I replayed the conversation between my dad and me. This led me to reach out to God again. Although some may view what I was doing as questioning God's work, I felt deep down within my heart as if I was simply asking Him for a sign or a miracle, to make me change my mind about what I was thinking, before I'd go home and follow through with it. I sincerely loved life. I loved everything about living life to the fullest, but I did not want to live a life of lies and mental anguish, especially since that came from not only the person I loved the most, but the one person I thought understood me enough to make an exception. He was a man of God, likewise, he was my father, but he acted as if he was never going to do that. I then nodded my head and began praying. Dear God, I come to you today not to ask or beg for anything, but to beseech that you bless my father's soul, his words, his body, his actions, and mostly his mind. I do not wish for him to feel guilty for what I'm about to do. I only want him to look at me as a lesson learned and hopefully, he can use it and try to help others, as he would always preach about at church. Bless the ones that will be affected by my actions and allow them to try and understand what I was going through, instead of chastising me over my dead body. Bless me, O Lord, and forgive my every sin. That was the last thing I remembered saying, as I continued listening to the music from my phone, before hearing 2 loud consecutive sounds that both came from inside of the bus. The sounds weren't identical, the first one sounded loud, but the other was raucous. I call that last sound, the sound of terror, because of what I saw when I opened my eyes. Passengers were running and screaming. I did the same once I saw what had happened. Gwen. I wish this bus ride would never end. That is what I thought when I sat down and got comfy, and began gazing out the window. I meditated on what was next for me when I got home to my mom, and how my dad would react when he found out his little angel was not only sexually active, but also pregnant. I was sad and confused. I felt terrible since I was very conscious of how my careless actions were going to let my parents down. My parents were going to be more upset, or hurt perhaps, by the selfishness of my action. Death crawled its way back to my head. I figured death was the solution to my situation. No one would have to be ashamed of me, I won't have to be ashamed of myself. I told myself God was in charge and it was He who put me on this path. But it couldn't be Him causing me to have suicidal thoughts. I could not preempt the outcome of this situation, but it was embedded in me that whatever the circumstance, it was God's work. I am prepared for whatever the outcome would be. That is what I said to myself, and continued to gaze through the window. I sat there for a few minutes, then I zoned out. I braced my head on the window and my thoughts flowed at a higher realm than I was at a place I could not physically ascend. I felt the tears stream down my cheeks, and I could do nothing to stop it. I was numb to everything that had happened that day, and was currently unfolding. I then nodded my head, wiped my eyes and reflected on Abel. I saw his big bright smile and remembered all the caring words he said to me when I was not in high spirits. My life flashed before me. I reminisced on many other blissful moments in my life before that day. My mind went to friends and families, but I didn't question why I felt the way I was feeling. All I wanted to do was to escape that reality. The bus stopped a few times. I wasn't certain if it was because of traffic or to pick up more passengers. I was in my own zone. I do remember that the bus stopped, and a woman got onto it with a baby in a carriage. I didn't pay too much attention to her because my eyes were watering. I didn't want any of the other passengers to notice, besides, I was all the way at the back. I nodded my head and started praying for the best outcome of my situation. During that prayer the bus made another stop. I was so into my prayer that I did not raise my head to see who came on, but that passenger came to the back and took a seat an arm reach from where I was sitting. I then said, "Screw this. I can't do much about this, I might as well give it to him." I placed everything into the hands of the Lord and was anticipating the end. Then it happened. I remembered getting upset with the bus driver after hitting my head on the window. I figured she must have driven into a pothole or maybe she drove over an animal. The tremor caused me to hit my head. Before I lifted my head to see what had happened, bow ow. That was what I heard. I then looked to the left of me and spotted a body drenched in blood on the floor. There was a gun next to the body. I shouted in disbelief. I got up, and I ran to the front of the bus as the other passengers. Maggie. I boarded the bus and quickly glanced around. I said to myself, "Thank God the bus isn't crowded." I did not want to face any more humiliation. There was the voice in my head that spoke earlier that instructed me to take my own life. I kept hearing that suicide was the best thing to do, that it will ease my pain. How should I do it? What was my easiest and quickest option? I tried my utmost not to pay those vile thoughts any attention, but it seemed like my best bet. In that moment, my faith in a superior power, though weak, led me to pray. To pray is a method of distraction, so I did. It was an odd feeling to be praying since I had doubts about God. I blamed Him for creating me like this. "Gentle Jesus," I whispered, then I stopped. I did not know what else to say. I then nodded my head, while leaning it towards the window, and I questioned my existence. Why was I made like this? Why didn't I just die at birth? Why did we have to move to Guyana? Why won't people accept me as I am? Why did they find it amusing to tease me? Why am I alive? Why did I care this much about what people thought of me? Why this? Why that? I found myself in awkward silence, speechless, and contemplating what was next. Those feelings haunted me until the bus shook. That's when I heard what seemed like a firecracker going off on the bus, which was then followed by loud screams. As I looked at the back, the passengers were running towards the front as if they were running for their life. What I saw next was so devastating that I arose with screams while trying to get off. Ron. I boarded the bus and quickly took a seat in a chair that was located on the opposite side of the back door. I was relieved to be sitting. I was pleased that in a short while I was going to be home. Being the only person that was sitting in that area, I placed my feet up on the other chair, which was at the side of me. I then leaned my head on the window and began gazing outside, wondering if anyone else was in such turmoil as I was. Unfortunately, I could not get answers by mere staring at random persons whose faces I could not see properly to begin with. I turned my focus to the inside of the bus and noticed that they were only about 2 other passengers that were on the bus at that time, and the question lingered again. I wondered if they were going through rough times in their life. Again, impossible for me to know if I do not engage them in a conversation, but everybody's expression was blank, so that talk was not happening. I plugged in my earphones, leaned my head back onto the window, and began dozing off. I had fallen asleep. The dream I had prior to waking up was the strangest yet most beautiful dream ever. I was awakened by loud screams that was coming from all directions in the bus. I dreamt I was a time traveler and went back to being 15 years old. I was living with my parents. We were all jolly and all happy, sitting and eating around a dinner table, sharing jokes and laughter with each other, having a terrific time. I then heard our doorbell ring. I asked to be excused and I got up to go see who it was at the door. Much to my surprise, no one was at the door. I heard a loud cry, which sounded like my mother's voice. When I got back to the dining room, I saw my mother was lying over my father's body. They both were covered in blood and I saw myself with a gun aimed directly at me. I was shot, and I instantly woke up. I woke up from one nightmare into another. I could not believe my eyes. People were screaming and running to get off the bus. I squealed and ran also. When I understood what transpired 4 seats away from where I was sitting, it felt unnatural. Jamie. I got seated and immediately began looking around the bus, observing who and what I was around. That made me forget for a brief moment the chaos unfolding in my world. I tried to analyze everyone that was around me. Maybe it was because this setting was new, or maybe it was God's way of trying to show me that there is more to life and that I didn't have all the problems in the world. The bus was very diverse that day, both culturally and gender-wise. My eyes were still slightly teary but eventually dried up, as I continued to look at the other passengers on the bus. I looked at what they were wearing, to how and where they were sitting. I was very observant. Some of them even caught me staring at them and quickly downed their heads. I sat there while gazing at the passengers, wondering what was going through their minds. What challenges are they facing, if any? Am I the only one on this bus that has problems and was feeling this way? But how could I have gotten the answers for my questions? Certainly not from looking, and I was not daring enough to go to every passenger and question them about their personal problems, so I continued to observe while not intruding into people's personal space. There were some familiar passengers on the bus that I'd seen before, including Josh. Though he had his head down, I still noticed him. I've known him ever since he was a little boy. Josh was the son of Pastor Roy, who was the head pastor for the largest church in Georgetown, which was built by my father's company some decades back. Every passenger that was on the bus had one thing in common that morning: they all looked gloomy. I felt like the few with a smirk on entry were forcing it. I found this odd, since it was a bright sunny summer Saturday. I had a flashback of when my kids were babies, how beautiful they were and how happy they made me, after seeing a young lady boarding the bus with her newborn baby. Funny how one event can do two things. That moment slapped me back to reality also. Once I thought about my kids, I began to think about their father and what we shared, or at least what I thought we had. Tears gushed through my eyes at his memory. I remembered our wedding day, and the vows we took before God and man, which was to die loving each other, but that covenant was broken. Our last meal together as a family came to mind, but was replaced by another thought. It was a conversation I had with my dad years ago, of him telling me Jake wasn't the right man for me because of his social status and family background. I got really upset with Dad for sharing his opinions on that. But my father's sentiments echoed true. He would be so disappointed in me. He was right again. Thought after thought consumed me about my marriage. I felt lost. I then heard a noise on the bus, which was followed by screams. I looked up and was astounded. With no clue of why people were screaming and what they were running from, I ran off the bus, and what I found out had happened was not just catastrophic but horrifying, and it made me scream. Lovey. The bus came, I boarded it and took a seat at the back. I sat there gazing while trying to escape the reality of what was happening in my life then. I was confused, and did not know to whom or where I was going to turn. I tried not to think of what had happened or how I was going to deal with the pain. So I began a conversation with God. I questioned him. "Oh Father, how could you do this to us? How could you do this to me? Was I not in a good place? Was it not good to be loved and catered to? How could you make her turn her heart against me? How could you take our baby's life? Why did you give him to me and take him back? What did he do to not get a chance to breathe your air? Why didn't you allow us to love him? Please awaken me from this awful nightmare, oh Lord. I need her back. I need my kid back. I need to be in her arms once again. Father, please." The bus stopped regularly for other passengers, but I didn't recognize any of them, so I continued praying whilst trying to evade my reality. I became irritated and impatient. I was not getting any answers. A few minutes after, I thought to myself, what is done and will never be undone. I, if anyone, would know that life offers no undo button. I began listening to a gospel album from my cell phone. While still not knowing where I was heading, but decided to take the bus to the very last stop, and thought to myself by then I might figure out where next. I sat there listening to my gospel music but still could not dodge the reality of everything that had happened. I closed my eyes and eventually fell into a light sleep and was appalled at what I had woken up to. The sound was so loud, my eardrums leapt. I instantaneously got a headache. Upon opening my eyes and seeing what had happened just inches away from me, my life changed forever. The paramedic. I remember my grandmother had an old fable that she preached to me every night before dinner after saying a grateful grace. She said, "The truth and only the truth shall set you free." As a 7-year-old boy, I never fully grasped the concept. As I aged, I came to appreciate that truism. It has caused me to live as an honest individual. My grandmother raised me well. She went out of her way to ensure I was all right. I credit my morals and deep-rooted values to her. Gran's was my first love, my idol, my first friend, and she inspired me. She will forever be my #1 priority. I admired her much and did my best to live the way she raised me. I made a concerted effort daily to do right by her. It wasn't always the truth that set me free though. While I lived as a truthful being, it was faith. Faith set me free. The events that took place that Saturday was not only an eye-opener to me, but that Saturday was also the real-life experience of another quote my grandmother had taught me, which was, "Whenever you think you have it bad, there are people who have it 10 times worse than you." Don't get me wrong, I have been a paramedic for about 3 years and have seen some devastating things, but the events that unfolded that Saturday was God's work. It was also God's sign to show everyone who had experienced what had happened on that bus, that He is real and He's our protector, even when we lose faith in Him. My name is Earl Semple. I was a 27-year-old paramedic for the local hospital in the city, Georgetown Public Hospital Complex, GPHC, at the time of that dreadful event. I resided in Georgetown at the time, but was originally born and raised in a small town on the east coast of Guyana called Buxton. Buxton was infamous for many things that I wouldn't get into right now, but what I will say about Buxton is that it was home for me and certainly taught me much. Most of which I have carried through life, whether good or bad. I am forever grateful. Amongst everything I learned growing up in Buxton, I'd say attitude is most important. I benefited from accepting this. One thing Buxtonians appreciated early on was how to make the little they had enough, a survival skill I have to date. I can't speak about my parents because I never met either of them, or did my grandmother spoke to me about them. As a boy, I lived a straight and boring life, as some of my friends would call it while teasing me. I basically went to school, then home, and to church and repeat. Same routine, different day. The weekends were pretty much the same except for me going to school and prolonged church hours. I did not see it as boring because that was the only life I knew. I embraced it and was happy with not going outside to play with friends after school or whatever else my school friends thought I was not doing that they were doing to have fun. Now that I'm grown, looking back then, I agree that I lived a basic life, but that basic life gave me tremendous opportunities to excel in order to become someone great. That humble life made my grandmother very proud of me. Since I did not go outside to play with my friends after school, I would immerse myself in my books, revising previous notes that I had learned in school or simply reading. Because of that and my grandmother's dedication to my education, at 16 years old I did so well at the Caribbean Examination Council, CXC, it landed me an opportunity of a full scholarship at a university in London, England. I was thrilled and I took full advantage of it. 4 years later, after obtaining a bachelor's degree in business management, I grew homesick and was missing Grans a lot also. I decided that I was going to move back home and try to get a decent paying job so that I could take care of myself and my grandmother, who was very ill at the time. I rented a small apartment for us in Kitty that was owned by one of my old classmates' parents, so the monthly charge wasn't exorbitant because they knew me since I was a child. I had enough savings that I brought back from London to last about 7 months, to pay a small rent and buy food for Grans and me. I also had to take care of her monthly medical supplies, so I wasted no time in searching for a part-time job. I landed a job 1 week into the search. I sent out applications to different business entities. I got a job offer to serve as an assistant manager for a local department store in the city. I accepted it and worked there for a little over 3 years since that was my major in university, but I still wasn't seeing any form of growth. Do not misread me, the salary was okay but there was no room for career advancement, so I sought other alternatives. A few days before my 24th birthday, one of my friends whose brother was a paramedic relayed to me that I would have made an exceptional paramedic. I found it odd but heard her out. She encouraged me to apply. She brought the application form and I signed up for the exam. I took the exam 3 weeks later, passed it, and began working the following week. I did lots of research on this job. Looking at scenes on television and on YouTube could not prepare me enough for that world I dived into. By no stretch of my imagination was I ready for all that I encountered daily in the field. I adjusted quickly, it was an easy job for me, and it paid well. Every day, I thought of all that I was going to see and do as God's doings and that it was all part of life. My grandmother's saying echoed true in the things I saw daily. One thing that stuck with me was to value your loved ones. I saw many people taking their last breath without getting a chance to say goodbye to their families. I saw parents heartbroken after seeing the lifeless body of their kids, lying in the streets with absolutely no power to save them. I've seen it all, and I have a deeper appreciation for my families and friends, and more importantly, those experiences caused me to value Liz, the love of my life. Liz was a country girl, as some would say. She was originally from Tondicka, which was considered as the countryside of Guyana. We had been dating for over 3 years at that time and were in love with each other. At least that is what I thought until she confessed to me about her cheating habits 2 months before I was going to ask her to be my wife. Words cannot explain how much I was crushed by her confession, although she made the right choice, to be honest. I still believe to this day, that it was the worst thing she had ever done to me. Her honesty killed the faith I had for love and committed relationships. She jeopardized everything I had planned for us, and the only person who could have comforted me at that time was my grandmother, which she did many days. My grandmother's comfort would only sustain me for so long because everything I did reminded me of the times I had with Liz. We did everything as a couple for the 3 years that we were together. I was not escaping that misery I was going through no matter what I did. We also had mutual friends, so we would bump into each other occasionally, though I tried to avoid her. Nothing I did was allowing me to forget completely about Liz, or pushed me to move on, so I came up with this figment of moving with my grandmother to another country to start a new life. My grandmother was so supportive of me that she instantly agreed, so I began preparing to move immediately. Before that Saturday, we had already packed most of our belongings and was leaving for the US the following Monday to stay with a close family member, until we could afford to be on our own. I remember waking up about 7:30 and prepared for my last day at work in Georgetown. I did the usual routine. As I got up, I went straight to my living room, where my grandmother was already sitting reading her Bible. We prayed together for about 30 minutes. I took a shower, got dressed, then ate breakfast before heading out to work. It was a 30 minutes walk to get to my job from where I lived. I enjoyed the walk, and that morning wasn't any different. I arrived at work at exactly 9:05 a.m., clocked in and went straight to the office and sat at my desk. I was still thinking about everything that was going on in my life, but I quickly snapped out of that zone as my grandmother had taught me to do while I was at work. Saturdays were very busy for me, but that Saturday morning we did not get any calls for the first 3 hours that I was at work, and before you knew it, it was lunchtime. I then got the list of food orders from my coworkers as we would do every Saturday and set out to make one big lunch pickup for everyone. I took one of the ambulance trucks that were used by a senior paramedic for his own personal use and went to get lunch. I got to the restaurant, ordered the food and waited for about 15 minutes before it was ready. Once I collected it, I hopped into the vehicle and headed back to the base. After driving for about 10 minutes, I approached a red light at a major intersection and stopped. As I sat there observing my surroundings, while waiting for the light to change, I noticed that a city bus was coming in the opposite direction along with other vehicles. The light turned green and I drove over the intersection passing the bus and the other vehicles, and that was when I heard a loud noise which sounded as if a tire had blown out. I did not have any idea where it came from until I looked into my rearview mirror and observed that the bus had stopped. The passengers were running off the bus screaming. I immediately stopped the truck, got out and ran towards the bus to see what had happened. Before getting onto the bus I asked about two of the passengers that came off what was happening. They could not find the words to explain. I guess they were still in shock. I got onto the bus from the front door that was open. I saw the bus driver standing at the front of the bus, with tears in her eyes looking in my direction. That was when I turned my attention to the back of the bus and noticed what appeared to be a lifeless body of a young man, laying in his own blood with a gun beside him. I quickly ran to his body and turned it over to see if he was still alive, and by God's grace, he still had a pulse but was unconscious. I quickly reached into my pocket, grabbed my phone and called 911 and requested that they send an ambulance urgently, before calling my base to request the same thing. I did all I could to stop the bleeding and shortly an ambulance from my base came and took over. They carried him to a nearby hospital. The detective. I quit my job 15 years ago after I found myself contemplating several times whether to go to work or not for frivolous reasons. Though I was heftily compensated, for some reason I did not love my job. I was miserable some days while on duty. Not that I was lazy or tardy, nor was I absent without just cause. I was one of my boss's favorite after a mere month on the job. The first month I worked 7 days a week for nearly 15 hours per day. My dedication and commitment quickly made an impression. Before the scheduled probation period was over, I was confirmed as a staff member, acquiring a secret bonus from the boss himself. I guess saying yes to everything the other staff complained about paid off. After working at the warehouse for 16 months, I realized that making boxes was not something that I was passionate about. Considering the person that I am, instead of nagging and complaining to myself and other coworkers about how much I hated the job, I resigned with 2 weeks' notice as required. I did some soul searching to determine what I was passionate about. Some believe that very early on a person would be able to identify something they are passionate about doing, but I, a 25 years old man, was now about to do that. Having no kids and being single at that time, was an advantage for me to act nomadic. I took full advantage of that, not just then but for most of my lonely life. I was born and raised in Queens, New York, in the middle of Richmond Hill, and had traveled many places throughout my life, but Richmond Hill was always my favorite place to be. I credit that to the environment, which was pristine and quiet for the most part. Being a family-oriented neighborhood, Richmond Hill was one of the main areas in Queens that attracted the majority of Guyanese East Indians immigrants. My parents were a few out of the thousands of Guyanese that resided in Richmond Hill. Having a Guyanese background, I thought it best for me to visit my parents' homeland in the search for a new start. Especially since I was very familiar with the country because of the numerous times that my parents and I would visit our family there. Guyana was my choice for exploration, and I was ready to move. I journeyed to JFK International Airport and my destination was Chetty Jagan International Airport to Mary. Unsure of what was waiting for me on the ground, I knew that I was desperate to find something. I arrived in Guyana on the first Monday in February in 1995 at 7 a.m., which was the first time in 3 years that I had visited the country. I must say that I was very impressed with how the East Bank corridor was transformed. In only 3 years there were new roads, new and reconstructed schools and police stations, and my favorite of them all was the scenery at the new Diamond housing scheme, which was transformed tremendously. I must say I was very impressed, and my hope of finding my passion here in Guyana grew a little more. I went to stay with some of my relatives that lived in Eccles, which was on the east bank of Guyana, not too far from the capital city. Once I settled in, I began my job search. My first attempt was to try getting admitted to the Guyana police force, since my cousin that I lived with persuaded me that it was the right profession for me. He was an inspector. I took what seemed to be silly advice at that time and fill out the application. I took the test the next month and nearly aced it. I got 98% of the questions correct when I only needed 65% for admission. Passing that writing exam with distinction and excelling significantly at the training camp landed me a detective position within the police force. This had only happened a few times before in that organization. It was a big accomplishment and I was very proud of myself. I cherished what I had learned thus far about policing work. This may be the passion I came to search for in Guyana, I would say to myself many times, because of the love that I had developed from the experience I earned from attending the detective training school. Coincidentally, that Saturday marked my 5th anniversary as an homicide detective, and I was still feeling as if it was just yesterday that I had started. I loved what I was doing. Every day was a learning process for me. The more experience I got, the better I was at performing my task. My office phone rang that Saturday afternoon and it was the police chief. She called to inform me about a possible double homicide that had happened moments ago in Bel Air. Bel Air was approximately 15 minutes away from the Brick Dam police station where I was based. I took the information and immediately set off to visit the crime scene. When I got to the house, other police officers were already there asking questions and looking for any bit of evidence that they could find. They were persons who looked like family members of the victims on the scene. They all were outside crying while trying to get into the house in which the police officers were barring them from getting access to. I got inside and the first thing I noticed was that the living room was partially wrecked. It was clear that a physical altercation happened there. The glass centerpiece was broken in half, chairs were upturned, cabinet mirrors were shattered, the television was on the floor, along with some glassware. There were also a few drops of blood around the room and up the stairs where I proceeded next. I got to the master bedroom and there I found the victims. I saw 2 bodies. The woman was lying closer to the bed, and the body of a man that was lying closer to the door. The man was lying on his stomach in a pool of blood and the woman was lying on her back also in blood. I examined their bodies and found out that they both were slain by gunshots. The man had about 3 gunshot wounds to his chest, and the woman bore a wound to her lower stomach. I also noticed the woman's face was bruised badly and her clothes were partially ripped, so it was clear to me that before the shooting had happened, she had been physically abused. The woman's attire could possibly be the reason for the wrecked living room and the drops of blood that were all over the house, I thought to myself. At that time, I had already established that it was not a murder-suicide, neither was it a robbery and a double murder. I was convinced that there was more to be discovered, so I went downstairs and questioned the neighbors and family members and learned that one other person was living in the house with the 2 deceased. An eyewitness also told me that they saw Shamar fleeing from the house with tears in his eyes and a devastated look on his face after the gunshots went off. My next task was to find Shamar and question him, since he was now the main suspect of the killings. He was the 13-year-old son of Pat Elgin and the stepson of Bevan Graham, both of whom were murdered on that fateful Saturday. Shamar was described as a very humble and respectable young man by those whom I spoke to. They also had doubts that he was capable of not only committing murder, but killing his own mother and stepfather that he loved dearly, was very questionable. Everyone that I spoke to believed that it was a robbery and a murder because of how happy the deceased family appeared. They were described as the ultimate family in the neighborhood who did everything together and were very friendly to the other neighbors. I continued to look around the premises to see if I could find any more clues that would have been useful in me solving this case. I received a transmission from the police dispatcher about another shooting that had just happened at Public Road Kitty. That was only a few minutes away from where I was. she said reports were made that a young man had shot himself in the head on a public bus. I left and hurried to the other crime scene with a small belief that the two shootings may be related. When I got to the scene on public road, the ambulance was already there, and the paramedics were attending to the victim who was still alive but unconscious and was losing lots of blood. I took a single look at him and my instinct told me it was Shamar. He looked like everything that was described to me by the eyewitnesses who saw him fleeing from the house after hearing the gunshots. His clothes were identical and his curly black and brown hair confirmed my assumptions. The paramedics then placed him into the ambulance and rushed him to a nearby hospital for further medical attention. I got on the bus through the back door and noticed a .357 Magnum revolver lying on the floor in a pool of blood. After carefully examining the gun and looking for other clues around the bus, I went to the driver. I questioned her on what transpired. I did not get much out of her, or any of the other passengers that were on the bus. They all were traumatized by the experience. I left the scene and went to the hospital hoping that the young man was still alive and that he was going to be okay. He was critical to me solving both cases. Upon arriving at the hospital, I was greeted by another police officer who confirmed that the young man was, in fact, Shamar, the 13-year-old son of Pat Elgin and the stepson of Bevan Graham. He also told me that the gun that was used in the shootings was registered to his stepfather. The officer was accompanied by a doctor who promised me that Shamar was going to be okay. He informed that the bullet did not damage any major tissue in his face. The doctor also advised me to allow him to get some rest because he needed some time to heal properly before he would be able to talk again. I felt relieved and anxious at the same time because I wanted to talk to him badly to find out exactly what had happened on that fateful day. Although I already had an inkling on what had happened, my gut told me something was not right. The way that his parents' bodies were and the bruises on his mother's face were saying a lot more to me than just Shamar picking up a gun and killing them both. I also uncovered that there were numerous complaints by a family member about domestic violence that was happening in the home of the deceased. Each time the police would go to check it out, the husband assured them that everything was okay. A few weeks passed and Shamar was recovering rapidly and started speaking, but he was not yet fully recovered, so I did not bother to ask him any questions on what had taken place on that Saturday. I wanted to make sure that he was feeling better first. The next week I got a call from one of his doctors saying that he had requested to speak to me. The drive to the hospital was solemn. Once I got there, he told me every detail about what happened. Shamar. I woke up that Saturday morning to a rumbling sound in my mother's voice at a higher pitch than normal. She was screaming to the top of her lungs, sounding helpless and hurt. I could hear the fear in her voice as she screamed continuously while crying out loud for help. This was not new to me. My stepdad would physically abuse my mom from time to time for reasons only he knew. That day seemed to have taken the cake. There were broken glasses, furniture and appliances were being thrown around the house and there were traces of blood. I felt as if I had woken up to a nightmare, and the worst part about it was that the neighbors couldn't hear a thing. No one could hear her cries for help and render assistance. No one was coming to save her from that beast of a husband. I hated him for the way he hurt my mom. I sat in my room for about 45 minutes trying to blank out the sound of my mother's poignant voice, as she continued to cry for help. It got to a point where she was knackered and could no longer scream. She groaned in pain. I went downstairs and found that the house was completely trashed and there were droplets of blood everywhere. I was terrified of what the outcome might be. My mind raced. The fight continued. Mom and Dad were upstairs in their room and he hit on her incessantly. It sounded like someone in the gym was beating on a punching bag, but every punch was followed by a human groan. Dad was yelling all sorts of profanity to Mom as he continued to abuse her, so I decided to go upstairs to see if I could stop what was going on. I got upstairs and find Dad standing over Mom, hitting her repetitively to the face as if he were trying to smash it in. That made me irate. I saw the blood that was gushing out of my mom's face and immediately ran towards them with the intention of stopping Dad from hitting Mom. Once I got closer and grabbed him, he turned around, smacked me, then pushed me aside before turning his attention back to Mom and continued beating her. I was confused and furious. I did not know what to do to help my mother as she was being abused right before my eyes. I remembered that Dad kept a gun in the cupboard outside of the master bedroom, so I quickly went to get it without giving thought to the dangers of what that thing could cause. I only wanted him to stop hitting Mom. I took the gun out the cupboard and clocked it. I was familiar with how to operate this particular gun. Dad taught me to use it in the event he wasn't home, and Mom and I were in danger. I went back to the room and this time Mom was standing and Dad was in front of her still beating on her. I pointed the gun towards Dad and began screaming at him, but only with the intention of stopping him from beating her, nothing more. He turned to me and I noticed the rage in his eyes as his attention shifted from Mom to me. He walked towards me, and once I saw that, the next 20 or 30 seconds was a blur. I too seemed as if I had just blinked only once. I closed my eyes and pulled the trigger in fear, which was unfortunate because the bullet did not hit Dad, it went straight to Mom's stomach and she started bleeding and fell to the ground. Dad immediately ran to Mom's body and fell to his knees. He tried for a few seconds to stop the bleeding with his hands before getting up. He walked swiftly towards me. I closed my eyes and pressed the trigger again. I must have pressed it at least 4 more times, hitting Dad to his chest, causing him to fall to the ground. I then dropped the gun and went over to see if Mom was okay, and that was when reality hit me. Mom was laying there covered in blood with her eyes open, but she was not breathing. I cannot explain the string of emotions that followed. I stood still for about 15 minutes in tears with no idea of what to do next or who to call. I then picked up the gun and left the house in fear and anger, not knowing where I was heading but just wanted to disappear or go somewhere very far away. I walked aimlessly with no destination in mind. I thought of what I had just done to my own dear mother. I knew for a fact that I couldn't live with that for the rest of my life, since I was already being haunted by my own conscience which was eating at me, telling me what a terrible person I was for killing my parents. I came up with solutions in my young mind, solutions to ease the pain and punishment ahead of me when the world found out that I was responsible for their deaths. My mind was the devil's playground that day and I was the caretaker for the field. I got to a bus stop and took a seat to clear my mind since no one was there. I had been walking for a very long time. I must have sat there for about 3 minutes while trying to elude reality. As I got up to continue walking, a bus came and stopped. The driver must have thought that I was waiting to board it. So I decided to board the bus. I got on and walked quickly to the back with my head down and got seated. My mind was all over. My thoughts consumed me. I could not deal with the mental anguish that was tormenting me. That was when I remembered that I had the gun. I took it out, placed it under my chin, and pulled the trigger, hoping that my pain would have ended on that faithful day, but miraculously, here I am, still alive, still in pain. Part 3. Mandi. Now 15 years later, the events that took place on that Saturday afternoon still replay in my mind as if it were just yesterday. I can see the traumatized faces of those passengers who were on the bus running and screaming to get off because of what they witnessed. It was a gruesome experience that reshaped my life. I am a stronger believer in God and His workings. My Savior did not only save that kid's life, but He showed me He does not give us what we want when we want it, but His hand is never short, and He always delivers what we need. That was what He did by allowing the doctors to discover a treatment that would give my husband a chance to live a little longer, while battling a terminal illness. For years Barry was strong and healthy, and that was all God. God permitted Barry to continue to be the great father and husband that he has always been. He allowed him the opportunity to hold and love his first grandchild. We had lots of priceless moments after. I am now a grandmother, my family is healthy and happy. Thank God that there is always food on our table, and we still have a place to call home. Although God took Barry from us 4 years ago, I am most grateful for the extended time He afforded us. I am living proof that faith can move mountains. I am stronger in my faith. I still serve in the church and will always. Joyce. Talk about a lifetime of love and relentless emotional pain whenever I tell my story. It's been years and I'm still in love with Dwayne, notwithstanding him quitting on us. We made future plans, we wanted a life with each other. It may strike you as odd, but what happened on the bus that day made me more thankful for meeting Dwayne even though we didn't work. I had long, lonely, sleepless nights and my days weren't any better. I accepted gloomy days with every new sunrise. Whenever I got some shut-eye, Dwayne plagued my dreams. Nightmares of him haunted my serene soul. To this day, I am still suffering. Everything I do, everywhere I went, there was something to remind me of Dwayne, be it the way he laughed, the songs he listened to, the places we went together, the foods he liked, something always retell the moments spent with him. When Dwayne had told me about his ex-wife's pregnancy, I offered to stay by his side. Even if she went through with the pregnancy, I would be a perfect foster parent if we were together. It pained me to the core to provide this support, loving him while my heart burned, but anything for my Dwayne. I wanted to be his, and him mine, irrespective of the circumstance. Just when I thought my love would be happy that I offered, Dwayne rejected the proposal at the chance to have a picture-perfect family portrait. He said he was leaving to build a family with his wife and kid. I make concerted attempts to persuade Dwayne not to give up on us, but with much insensitivity, he chose his wife and left me to fold in agony. It has been 15 years since and I'm still hoping that one day he will change his mind and choose me. My friends and family think I am naive, but affairs of the heart cannot always be explained and only I felt the pain. My soul yearned for him since he left. I made it clear to my circle that I will never love another man and my heart will always be Dwayne's. They would laugh and tell me how ridiculous I was. Everyone said I would find love again, that Dwayne wasn't the last man on earth. I have not dated since my relationship with Dwayne ended. Falling in love with anyone else was far-fetched. Dwayne broke my heart and took many pieces with him. What was left was not enough to make me whole again. I've been unflappable and will always be anticipating his return. I am waiting for him to rebuild what he destroyed, waiting for him to come home. Teddy. Talk about a life-changing experience that would have such a positive impact on my entire existence, and would change the way I live and the way I appreciate life. Talk about that dreadful Saturday. I became more empathetic to others and developed a deeper love for myself. How is it that one experience can reshape my thinking and be responsible for the decisions that I make from then onwards? That Saturday afternoon was the rebirth of my conscience, which led me to where I am today. A place of love and humility, and most importantly, a place where I was able to recover and be sober for 6 years. With each passing day, I develop a greater sense of pride by the decision I made to enroll in an alcohol recovery program. I paid off slowly but surely. It was the most sensible choice I have made in years and it has saved my life. Days after leaving the program a sober man, I went to Mandi. I wanted to be closer to my family. I decided that I would have visited them and begged to come back home so that we could have been one big happy family once more, just as we were when Marty was alive. Upon my arrival at the house, I was greeted by a young man who claimed that he had purchased the house from a family that now resides in America. I was so heartbroken when he told me that. I did not know how I was going to get in contact with my kids, now that they are so far away. Then faith happened once more. A neighbor must have recognized me and approached me with some valued information that my kids left in case I came back home. I got their contact details. I could not be more grateful to my old neighbor and to God. I communicate with my kids and grandchildren daily. They are providing financial support to me while I get back on my feet, and they are filing the necessary paperwork to get me to America to live with them. Nettie. Thank God that young man survived his horrid attempt of suicide on that bus. I began looking at life differently from then onward. That event made me realize that Todd was not in control of my happiness or my well-being. neither did he control the health and strength that my son needed to grow. If he had control of those things, I know beyond any doubt that I would have been a miserable woman and my son would have been a memory. Todd still has not given me an apology or offered an explanation as to why he did not want to accept his son, or why he left the country without informing me and returning when our boy was already 7 years old. That was when he decided to show up at my house asking me to be a part of his life. I don't know what brainwave he had that led him to do that, neither did I care how he arrived at that decision. Though I had animosity towards him, I still allowed him to visit his son. The son he rejected for years. Todd saw our boy a few times when he was 7 years old and disappeared for a while. Nothing strange on his part. He returned when our boy was 11 years old and had just written common entrance. Our son excelled and gained his spot at Queen's College. Todd was proud. He took him for a few days, loved on him and showered him with gifts before leaving again without a trace, without a goodbye. It has been 4 years since we last saw Todd. He never called to check in on how our boy was doing. This is no shocker. He has been neglectful to him since birth. He has not changed one bit, and sooner or later his conscience is going to get the best of him, and he will regret not taking advantage of not playing an active role in his son's life. He will be sorry he made himself just a father and not a daddy. I am still both the father and the mother of my son, as I have been from day one. My parents and siblings are very supportive. We have a healthy family relationship, an unbreakable bond, and most of all we have God on our side, so we will continue to be fine. Josh. Today I am happy and grateful for life and all that God has continued to bless me with over the years. I am healthy, I am strong, I am in love, I am faithful, and most of all I am living the life that I always wanted. I live freely, and that has removed the deception I carried for years. Although my dad did not accept that his rejection put me in danger, and later disowned me, God reassured me that I am his creation. I was never mad at Dad for his actions. I do not think I can ever be angry at him for his decision when he found out my sexual orientation. I will continue to pray for him as I have always done. I have not heard from him or seen him in years. Nonetheless, he will always be my dear father, and I will always love and respect him like a son is supposed to. I knew Shamar and his parents personally from attending my father's church, and never would have thought that as a family they were having so many problems as was revealed after the incident on the bus. Shamar parents always looked as though they had it together, as if they were happy when they really were not. Him murdering his parents and attempting suicide on that bus that day in my presence left me traumatized for weeks, having to attend counseling daily, and my dad never once accompanied me. Thank goodness I am strong at heart. I got over that by the grace of God, and now I am happily united with a partner that is loving and caring. God placed him in my life, just as I was placed in my father's life. I know for a fact that my mother would have supported my every decision, and she is smiling down on me. That is all that matters presently. I have the continued support of Tony, and God is on my side. Gwen. I have learned that even though you are not always mindful of your actions, the decisions that you make will follow you and could have a lasting impact on your life. For this reason, it is always good to listen to your parents and the older folks, although what they may be saying to you does not make sense at that moment. Prior to getting onto that bus, I was a lost teen with selfish ambitions. I thought only about myself and could care less about others. I did not consider how disappointed my parents were with me. They did everything in their power to ensure that myself and siblings were living comfortably. They tried to steer us from destructive paths. Reflecting on that day, I cannot believe what a dark place I was in. I, Gwen Thomas, was contemplating suicide. I would have been so ashamed of myself had I allowed the devil to win. What happened on that bus was distressing, but to this day, I believe that it was God's work. It served as an eye-opener for me. My life changed after that day, and though I survived the incident, everything went downhill. My parents were of course very upset that I was pregnant, so they took me to have the abortion done. A few months later Abel moved to another country and we never spoke again. With all the failures and challenges that I had to deal with after getting pregnant, the worst of them all is knowing that I will never be able to have any kids of my own. Because of that abortion, the lining of my uterus was severely thinned, added to other complications surrounding childbearing. The fact that I will never be able to carry another child haunts me every day. I am a teacher now, and a mother figure to many of my students. I get to see and spend quality time with them each day, and that helps to ease the pain that I still feel. Maggie. On my 12th birthday, my parents looked me in my eyes and reminded me of how beautiful I was, and will always be within their eyes. They have always loved and given me the support I needed in life. This has and will always mean a lot to me. Now that I am an adult, I have learned that even with my physical condition, I am still a person, and once I have life there is hope for brighter days. Me thinking about suicide that day following the humiliation I faced at the hands of those mean kids, was a selfish thought. Not only was I being inconsiderate of how my family and friends would feel, but I was also not thinking about my future. I am mentally in a better place. I am grateful to God and I am satisfied with life. I thank Him for life, irrespective of what I looked like. After that traumatizing experience on that bus, I started to appreciate life more. I am comfortable with the way I look, and I now have deaf ears to anything negative said about my appearance. The teasing did not stop and probably will never stop, but I will always continue to embrace myself, flaws and all, just as my family does. Ron. After having a near-death experience on that frightful day, I realized that for all my suicide attempts, I didn't really want to die, rather I was seeking out the attention I lacked as a child. That one encounter of seeing Shamar on that bus, laying there in his own blood, put a lot of things into perspective for me. Ever since then I have grown in a mature and humbling way. My uncle and I now get along very well, and have developed a relationship of understanding with and respect for each other. He must have felt guilty after recognizing that I was on the bus when the shooting happened, and that I could have been injured too. So later that week, he sat with me and we had an hour-long discussion that finished with us coming to a mutual understanding on where we were, and the way forward. I will not lie and say that I'm a better person than I was that day on the bus, but what I can say is I'm much more considerate to my health with regards to my drug use. Although I have not sought out any recovery programs or counseling that could help me with my addiction, I am more aware of the risk involved every time I use drugs. So now I don't abuse drugs, rather, I take it with discretion. Jamie. I never understood why God led me to that bus to witness such horror, while I was dealing with my own tragedy. Whatever His reasons, I do not regret being there, and I thank Him for aligning that encounter. After finding out about the reason why that young man wanted to kill himself, I realized that day that I was not at the point of no return. There are persons who had more battles than me. I learned a lot about our fleeting moment we are allowed to grace this earth. I always thought that I couldn't live without Jake, but having faith has shown me differently. I am grateful for the things and people that I have. I am a more dedicated mother. I pour all my love into my kids, they will never have to question if they are cherished. I am living for them. When Jake left me, our divorce proved to me that nothing in life was meant to last forever. Death is the only assurance, but what we should do is to cherish every moment. The memory of a happy moment may be all we have left when the person we made the memory with leaves. 2 decades ago, Jake and I were strangers, we made loads of memories and went back to being strangers. Much to my amazement, my dad did not throw anything in my face regarding what he had told me in the past about Jake when finding out about our divorce. He didn't say "I told you so." He encourages me to continue living my life for myself and my kids. After my kids had found out of their father's decision to leave me, they were devastated and more heartbroken than I was. They decided that they will never speak to him again, in which they certainly did. I urged them to reach out to him, but they made up their minds not to. I haven't seen or heard from Jake in years. I would like to think if he died, someone would remember me, his first wife who bore kids for him, and inform us. But I don't know for certain that he's alive. What I do know is that he was one selfish son of a gun, and God will deal with him for what he put me and my kids through. Lovey. What I witnessed that day on the bus is what I described to my friends today as a soul call for me. It was a call for me to be a better person, a call for me to appreciate whatever God allowed along this journey of life, be it good or bad. Most of all, it was a call for me to recognize the forces at play, the energy that I thought was responsible versus the energy that was actually responsible for my happiness. I spent months blaming and beating myself up for what had happened to me that day at work, while hoping and praying that Jenny would eventually forgive me and try to patch things up. This has not yet, nor probably never will happen. What I am certain of, is that for the first time in my entire life I realized that I do not need anyone to make me happy, and I am so grateful for that. I was able to find that self-confidence when I needed it most. Jenny took my heart with her when she left me, and if I never find another love like that for the rest of my life, I will be okay. I have found unconditional love within me, for me.
Hey guys, this is JL Adams. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this journey.